My name is Kira, and I am 33 years old. I work as a forensic accountant uncovering hidden money and financial lies for a living. At my grandfather's will reading, the lawyer handed me a sealed envelope containing the deed to a rotting abandoned house and a single crisp $20 bill. My family exploded into laughter. My father sneered, telling me I wasted my time caring for a broke old man. But when I looked closely at the serial number on that $20 bill, I realized my grandfather had not left me a pile of junk. He had left me the exact weapon I needed to destroy my father's entire empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in your family only to prove them all wrong. The heavy mahogany table in Mr. Caldwell's law office felt as cold as the people sitting around it. Outside, rain beat against the large glass windows of the downtown high-rise, but inside the atmosphere was thick with greed. I sat on the far end of the table wearing a simple black suit, my hands folded tightly in my lap. I was the only person in the room actually mourning the loss of Grandpa Harrison. Directly across from me sat my father, Richard. He kept checking his platinum watch, letting out loud, irritated sighs. Next to him was my mother, Patricia, adjusting her expensive pearl necklace and looking at the law office decor with polite disdain. Slouching in the leather chair beside her was my younger brother, Derek. At 29, Derek was the undisputed golden boy of the family. While I had paid my own way through college and built a career dissecting financial fraud, Derek was currently on his fourth attempt at launching a tech startup entirely funded by our parents. My mother leaned forward, her eyes scanning my outfit from across the table. She frowned. "You really could not find anything more presentable to wear today, Kira. I suppose your little bookkeeping job does not pay enough for a proper blazer." "I am a forensic accountant, Mom," I said quietly. "And I am wearing the suit Grandpa bought me when I passed my certification exams." My father scoffed, not even looking up from his phone. "You spent every weekend at that nursing home coddling the old man, instead of putting in billable hours at my firm. Let us see if all that wasted time actually pays off today. I have a major corporate merger to finalize this afternoon, and I do not have time to sit here listening to sentimental nonsense." Derek chuckled, kicking his feet out under the table. "Relax, Dad. We are just here for the payout." Grandpa was rich. He probably left Kira his collection of mothball sweaters for being such a good nurse. I bit the inside of my cheek, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Grandpa Harrison had built Harrison Holdings from the ground up decades ago. He was a brilliant man, sharp until the very end, but my father had slowly pushed him out of the company as his health declined. For the last 3 years, I was the only one who visited him. We would sit in his room for hours playing chess and talking about numbers. He always told me that numbers never lie even when people do. Mr. Caldwell, a serious man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, finally cleared his throat and opened the thick leather folder on his desk. The room went instantly silent. My father put his phone face down. My mother sat up completely straight. Derek actually leaned forward, his eyes bright with anticipation. "We are here today to execute the final will and testament of Arthur Harrison." Mr. Caldwell began, his voice echoing in the quiet office. Arthur was very specific about the division of his assets. "I will read the distributions exactly as he mandated." He turned the page. "To my son Richard, I leave my controlling shares of Harrison Holdings." My father let out a breath he had clearly been holding. A smug, victorious smile spread across his face. He nodded to himself, muttering that it was about time the old man handed over the keys to the kingdom completely. I watched him closely. As a forensic accountant, my job is to notice details other people miss. My father did not just look happy. He looked profoundly relieved, like a man who had just avoided a disaster. Mr. Caldwell continued. "To my daughter-in-law, Patricia, I leave the entirety of my liquid assets and the offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands." My mother let out a delicate, delighted gasp. She reached over and squeezed my father's arm. I could already see her calculating the luxury renovations she would make to their mansion, the extravagant vacations she would book to show off to her country club friends. She looked at me with a triumphant smirk, as if she had won a competition I did not even know we were playing. And to my grandson Derek, Mr. Caldwell, read his tone remaining perfectly neutral. I leave the vintage luxury car collection stored at the estate along with the contents of the primary trust fund. Derek actually pumped his fist in the air. Yes. He turned to my parents, his face flushed with greed. Do you know how much those cars are worth at auction? I can liquidate the Aston Martin alone and fund my new app development, plus the trust fund. I am set for life. My parents beamed at him. My father reached over and patted Derek on the shoulder, telling him he deserved every penny for being such an innovative entrepreneur. It was sickening. They were treating my grandfather's legacy like a lottery jackpot, celebrating his death, because it meant a massive payday for their excessive lifestyles. I sat perfectly still, my hands still folded in my lap. I did not care about the money. I had built a successful life for myself without their help. But seeing them disrespect the man who had built the very wealth they were currently cheering over made my stomach turn. Then the room grew quiet again. Mr. Caldwell turned to the final page of the document. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine behind his wire-rimmed glasses. I noticed a strange, almost sympathetic expression on his face. The tension in the office suddenly spiked. My parents and my brother turned to look at me, their faces eager to see what crumbs the family scapegoat had been tossed. And finally, to my granddaughter, Kira. Mr. Caldwell read slowly. Arthur left a personal message. He wrote to Kira, the only one who actually understands the value of looking beneath the surface. I leave my most prized possession. My heart beat a little faster. I did not want millions, but I wondered what Grandpa considered his most prized possession. Was it his antique chess set? His personal journals? Mr. Caldwell reached into his desk drawer. He did not pull out a heavy folder of stock options or a thick stack of banking documents. Instead, he pulled out a sealed, slightly yellowed envelope. He slid it across the long mahogany table toward me. "This is for you, Kira," the lawyer said softly. "It is the deed to the property on Elm Street along with the physical item he requested I hold for you." I stared at the envelope. Elm Street. That was the industrial edge of town. The property there was an abandoned, boarded-up Victorian house that had been rotting for decades. The city had been trying to condemn it for years. Derek let out a loud, sudden bark of laughter. "The junk house! He left you the haunted junk house." My mother covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent, cruel giggles. "Oh, Kira, I suppose it matches your aesthetic perfectly. You can finally move out of that tiny apartment of yours and live among the rats." I ignored them, keeping my focus on the envelope. I picked it up. It felt light. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it. Inside was a folded piece of heavy paper, clearly the deed to the dilapidated property. But there was something else tucked inside the fold of the deed. I pulled it out. It was a single crisp $20 bill. For a moment, I just stared at the green paper resting in the palm of my hand. A $20 bill and a worthless, rotting piece of land. My father leaned back in his leather chair, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt on his face. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that filled the room. "You wasted your weekends taking care of that broke old man instead of working for my firm." He sneered, pointing a finger at the bill in my hand. "Now you get a pile of junk and lunch money. It is fitting for an accountant who counts pennies for a living." "You have always been a disappointment, Kira, but this is truly pathetic." My mother nodded in agreement. A smug smile plastered across her face. "This is what happens when you stubbornly refuse to be a team player in this family. You chose to alienate yourself, and your grandfather clearly saw how useless you are. Take your $20 and go buy yourself a cheap meal. We have real assets to manage now." Derek was still laughing, pulling out his phone to text his friends about his new car collection, completely dismissing my presence. They expected me to break. They expected me to cry, to yell, to demand a fair share of the liquid assets or the company stock. They wanted to see the scapegoat finally crumble under the weight of this ultimate humiliating insult. But I did not cry. I did not yell. I looked down at the vintage $20 bill in my hand. My forensic training immediately kicked in. The paper felt different. It was an old 1934 series bill. And as my eyes scanned the green ink, I noticed the serial number printed on the corner. It was an incredibly specific, unusual sequence of 11 characters. Grandpa Harrison did not do anything by accident. He was a man of numbers, a man of hidden depths. He had told me that numbers never lie even when people do. I looked up from the bill. I met my father's arrogant gaze. I looked at my mother's mocking smile and my brother's greedy excitement. A cool, profound sense of clarity washed over me. I carefully folded the $20 bill and tucked it into my suit pocket right next to my heart. I stood up from the mahogany table, pushing my chair back with a quiet scrape against the floor. I offered them a small, icy smile. "Enjoy your payout, Richard," I said deliberately, using his first name. "Make sure you count those offshore accounts very carefully." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of the law office, leaving them staring after me in total confusion, completely unaware that they had just laughed at the very weapon that would bring their entire empire crashing down. The rain fell harder as I pulled my car out of the downtown parking garage, leaving the towering glass structure of the law office behind me. The sleek streets of the financial district gradually gave way to gray skies and congested traffic. I turned the heater on high, but the cold I felt was not from the harsh weather outside. It was the residual chill of sitting in that mahogany room with people who shared my blood, but treated me like an infectious disease. My phone buzzed aggressively in the cup holder. A text from my mother popped up on the screen, complaining about my dramatic exit and demanding I show some respect for my brother's new wealth. I swiped the notification away and put the device on silent. I did not have time for her predictable tantrums or my father's arrogant gloating. I had a puzzle to solve. I navigated my car toward the industrial edge of the city, a place where the pristine wealth of my family's social circle never dared to venture. As the neighborhoods grew grittier and the roads more fractured, my mind drifted to Grandpa Harrison. He was a true force of nature. He was a man who built a massive empire with grease on his hands and a brilliant mathematical mind that terrified his competitors. When my father took over Harrison Holdings, he sterilized the company entirely. Richard traded genuine innovation for hostile takeovers, corporate sabotage, and flashy PR campaigns. Grandpa hated it. But more than anything, he hated how my father treated me. While Richard and Patricia groomed Derek to be the heir apparent, indulging his every reckless financial whim and funding his failed startups, Grandpa would sit with me in his quiet study. He taught me how to read complex balance sheets by the time I was 12 years old. He told me that forensic accounting was not just about doing math on a calculator. It was about reading the story that desperate people tried to hide in the margins. He respected my analytical mind, and in a family obsessed with superficial appearances and country club status, that made him my only true ally. I turned onto Elm Street. The factories here had shut down decades ago, leaving behind rusted chain-link fences and cracked asphalt. At the very end of the dead-end road stood the property. To anyone else, it was a total nightmare. The massive Victorian house sagged against the gray sky, its exterior paint peeling off in long strips like dead skin. The windows on the ground floor were boarded up with rotting plywood, and overgrown thorny ivy choked the front porch. This was the junk house my father had laughed at so cruelly. I parked my car by the broken curb, pulling my long coat tight around my shoulders to block the wind. I stepped through the rusted iron gate, the hinges screaming a loud protest into the quiet street. The heavy brass key Mr. Caldwell had given me felt icy in my hand. I walked up the creaking wooden steps, avoiding a hole in the porch, and slid the key into the heavy oak door. It turned with a heavy, satisfying clank. The inside of the house smelled of damp wood, old paper, and forgotten years. Thick dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through the cracks in the window boards. The floorboards groaned under my boots as I walked down the main hallway. Despite the severe decay, the underlying architecture was absolutely stunning. Hand-carved crown molding and solid oak banisters hinted at the extreme grandeur this place once held before it was abandoned. I knew exactly where I was going. Grandpa had bought this specific property years ago, claiming he wanted to restore it as a historical project, but my father had always dismissed it as another one of the old man's senile financial delusions. I walked to the back of the first floor, pushing open a set of heavy mahogany double doors. This was the study. It was completely empty save for a massive dust-covered Persian rug in the center of the room and a heavy wooden desk pushed against the far wall. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of rain tapping against the roof. I stood in the center of the quiet room and reached into my suit pocket. I pulled out the crisp $20 bill. Holding it up to the dim light, I examined it with the highly trained eye of a forensic investigator. It was a 1934 series bill, noticeably older and texturally different from modern currency. I ran my thumb over the textured green ink, turning the bill over in my hands. There, pressed flat and nearly invisible against the ornate green seal on the back, was a tiny faded yellow sticky note. I carefully peeled it off, terrified of tearing the fragile paper. The handwriting was shaky from his failing health, but it was unmistakably Grandpa Harrison's script. The black ink was faded, but the message was perfectly clear. "Follow the numbers, kiddo. They never lie." I looked back at the front of the bill. The serial number printed in dark green ink stood out sharply against the aged paper. It was exactly 11 characters long, a very specific, deliberate combination of letters and numbers. Grandpa did not just leave me a piece of vintage currency to buy a cheap lunch. He left me a cryptographic key. I looked around the empty, dusty study. Follow the numbers. My eyes fell to the floor. The hardwood planks were wide and ancient, running the entire length of the room. I walked over to the heavy wooden desk and crouched down to look behind it. There was nothing but cobwebs and dust. I turned my attention back to the center of the room, staring at the massive Persian rug. It was incredibly heavy, thick, with decades of accumulated dirt and neglect. I gripped the thick, tasseled edge of the carpet and pulled with all my body weight, dragging it aside inch by inch until the center of the floor was completely exposed. Beneath the rug, the floorboards looked perfectly normal at first glance. But as I knelt down and brushed the thick layer of dust away with my sleeve, I noticed a severe discrepancy. The nail patterns on one specific square section of the wood did not match the rest of the floor. It was a subtle, almost invisible inconsistency, the exact kind of structural anomaly only someone trained to look for hidden compartments would ever spot. I pressed my palms flat against the wood, applying pressure. One board shifted slightly under my weight, giving way with a soft click. I dug my fingernails into the tight seam and pulled upward with a sharp jerk. The board popped loose, revealing a dark, hidden cavity beneath the floor. Nestled inside the hollow space was a solid steel custom-built floor safe. The digital keypad on the top panel was dark, but a small battery compartment sat right next to it. I always carry a specialized forensic accounting kit in the trunk of my car for field audits. I ran outside into the rain, grabbed my heavy black bag, and hurried back into the study. After popping open the compartment and inserting a fresh battery from my kit, the keypad beeped to life, glowing with a faint, harsh green light in the dim room. My hands were trembling slightly as the reality of the situation set in. I took the $20 bill and smoothed it out flat against my knee. I stared intently at the 11-character serial number. I took a deep, shaky breath, steadying my racing heart, and began to type the exact sequence into the illuminated keypad. The sharp electronic beeps echoed loudly in the empty, rotting house, cutting through the sound of the rain. I punched in the final number and held my breath. A heavy mechanical clunk vibrated deep through the floorboards. The internal locking mechanism disengaged entirely. I gripped the cold steel handle and turned it hard to the right. The heavy safe door swung open smoothly, on perfectly oiled hinges, revealing a deep, waterproof interior. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy, fireproof titanium lockbox. I popped the heavy metal latches and flipped the lid back. Resting securely on a bed of custom-cut protective foam was a sleek military-grade encrypted external hard drive and a thick leather-bound physical ledger. I carefully lifted the ledger out of the box and opened the heavy cover. The pages were completely filled with thousands of rows of handwritten financial data, offshore routing numbers, dummy corporation names, and wire transfer logs. This was not just a collection of historical family assets. This was a master shadow accounting record. My grandfather had spent his final years secretly tracking every single one of my father's illicit financial moves. I traced my finger down the first column of numbers, recognizing the names of shell companies I had seen crossing the news wires. As I flipped through the pages, a horrifying but brilliant picture began to form. My father's lavish lifestyle, the massive country club events, the luxury cars, the endless funding for Derek's failed technology startups, none of it was generated by actual corporate profits. The math had never added up to me, and now I had the absolute proof in my hands. Richard had been running Harrison Holdings as a massive, intricate Ponzi scheme. He was systematically embezzling tens of millions of dollars from his private investors to artificially inflate the company's value and fund his own greed. I stared at the pages, the cold air of the junk house completely forgotten. My family had laughed at me. They had mocked me for being an accountant who counted pennies. They thought they had won the ultimate prize, leaving me with a worthless house and a $20 bill. But as I closed the heavy leather ledger and secured the encrypted hard drive in my bag, a genuine smile finally broke across my face. They had no idea that they had just handed the family's scapegoat the exact weapon needed to completely obliterate their entire fraudulent existence. I secured the heavy titanium lockbox in the trunk of my car and drove straight back to my apartment. My living room quickly transformed into a forensic command center. I drew the blinds, brewed a pot of black coffee, and connected the military-grade hard drive to my secured offline laptop. Using the serial number from the $20 bill as the decryption key, the drive unlocked. What I saw on that screen kept me awake for 48 hours straight. Grandpa Harrison had mapped out everything. Harrison Holdings was bleeding cash. My father, Richard, had been funneling investor capital into a complex web of offshore shell companies. He was paying off early investors with money from new ones, the classic, undeniable structure of a massive Ponzi scheme. The deficit was staggering. $40 million completely vanished. I traced the wire transfers line by line. The stolen money had been spent on Patricia's lavish country club galas, Richard's luxury real estate acquisitions, and Derek's endless stream of failed tech ventures. The sheer audacity of the fraud made my blood boil. If the investors ever asked for a third-party audit, Richard would be going to federal prison for the rest of his life, and Grandpa Harrison brilliant until his last breath had documented every single fraudulent transaction. 2 days after the will reading, my phone vibrated on my desk. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I let it ring 3 times before hitting accept. Richard's voice flowed through the speaker, dripping with a sugary artificial warmth that immediately set my teeth on edge. "Kira, sweetheart, how are you holding up?" I kept my voice perfectly flat. "I am busy, Richard. What do you want?" He chuckled, a forced, hearty sound that echoed hollowly over the line. I know tensions were high at the lawyer's office. "Grief makes us all say things we do not mean. Your mother and I were talking, and we feel terrible about how things played out. We want to help you." "Help me?" I asked, pulling up a spreadsheet of his offshore transfers on my monitor. "How exactly?" "That property on Elm Street," he said, shifting his tone to sound like a deeply concerned parent. "It is a massive liability. The property taxes, the city citations for the rotting structure, the zoning issues. It is an absolute nightmare for someone on an accountant's salary. I want to buy it off you. $50,000 cash deposited into your account today. You can finally afford a down payment on a decent condo in a safe neighborhood. $50,000 for a property Grandpa purposely kept out of the company portfolio." Richard was desperate. "The house is not for sale," I said coldly. "Kira, be reasonable." Richard pressed the fake sweetness, instantly thinning out. "It is a toxic asset. I am doing you a massive favor. I can have my corporate legal team draft the transfer paperwork in an hour. Just sign it over." "I am a forensic accountant," I replied. "I know exactly what a toxic asset looks like. And this property is not one of them." "The answer is no." "Listen to me, you ungrateful little Richard," barked his voice, rising in anger. I tapped the end call button, cutting him off mid-sentence. My phone buzzed immediately. He was calling back. I blocked the number, tossed the phone onto my desk, and went back to tracing a specific wire transfer sent to an account registered in Derek's name. They thought they could bully me. They thought I was the same quiet girl they had beaten down for years. They were wrong. The quiet of my apartment shattered exactly 3 hours later. A heavy, aggressive knock pounded against my front door. I checked the security camera feed on my monitor. Richard and Patricia were standing in my hallway. Patricia looked absolutely furious, her designer coat pulled tight around her shoulders. Richard was glaring directly at the camera lens, his face flushed with rage. I unlocked the door, keeping the heavy steel security chain engaged. "What do you want? Open the door!" "Kira." Richard demanded, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "We are not doing this in the hallway where the neighbors can hear." I unlatched the chain and swung the door open, deliberately blocking the threshold. "You have 5 minutes. State your business." They pushed past me, stepping into my modest living room. Patricia immediately wrinkled her nose, looking at my thrifted sofa and the stacked boxes of case files as if she had just stepped into a toxic landfill. "This is how you live," Patricia scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. "If you had just signed the papers your father offered over the phone, you could afford to buy decent furniture. You have always insisted on living like a peasant just to embarrass us." "I like my furniture," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "It was paid for with clean money. Now why are you here?" Richard dropped the concerned father act entirely. He reached into his tailored overcoat, pulled out a thick legal document, and slammed it down hard on my kitchen counter. "Sign the deed transfer. Now!" "I already told you," I said, not even glancing at the paper. "The Elm Street property is not for sale." Richard took a step toward me, his voice lowering into a dangerous, desperate growl. "You do not understand how high-level business works. I have a massive commercial real estate merger closing next week. It will save the family legacy. It will propel Harrison Holdings to the next level. But the City Zoning Commission is blocking a crucial development permit because of that blighted property on Elm Street. I need that land to secure the merger. Without it, the deal falls apart completely." I looked at him, feeling a sharp surge of dark amusement. He was lying. Or rather, he was telling half a truth. He did not need a merger to save the legacy. He needed the massive cash influx from the merger to bail out the gaping hole in his Ponzi scheme. He needed fresh investor money to pay off the old investors before they realized their dividend checks were bouncing. And Grandpa Harrison, brilliant until his last breath, had deliberately placed the one piece of land Richard needed to close that fraudulent deal directly into my hands. "Your corporate mergers are not my problem," I said, crossing my arms. "Find another way to fund your excessive lifestyle." Patricia stepped forward, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. "You have always been exactly like this. Selfish, spiteful, always trying to ruin things for this family because you are deeply jealous." "Jealous of what exactly?" I asked calmly. "Of Derek." Patricia spat, her voice echoing in the small room. "You have always hated your brother, just like when you ruined his 18th birthday." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by her limitless capacity for delusion. "Ruined his birthday? You mean when you demanded I hand over the college savings I earned from working 3 minimum wage jobs so Derek could buy a luxury sports car?" "It was a milestone birthday," Patricia argued, completely detached from reality. "Family supports family. Derek deserved that car. But you stubbornly refused to be a team player. You humiliated us in front of the dealership by throwing a tantrum over a few $1,000s. And now you are doing it again. You are holding a worthless piece of junk hostage just to punish your father." "I am not punishing anyone," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "I am simply keeping what belongs to me. Grandpa left me that property, and I intend to honor his final wishes." Richard slammed his fist against the kitchen counter, making my ceramic coffee mug rattle violently. "You have no idea the forces you are playing with, Kira. If this deal collapses, the company takes a massive hit. Derek's trust fund gets delayed indefinitely. Our entire financial structure gets compromised. Do you really want to be responsible for destroying this family?" I looked at the man who had mocked me at the will reading, the man who had stolen millions from innocent people, the man who genuinely thought he could bully me into submission. He was sweating. A thin sheen of perspiration coated his forehead, despite the cool temperature of my apartment. He was absolutely terrified. The great Richard Harrison was backed into a corner, and he knew it. "The family is already destroyed, Richard," I said. walking over to the front door and pulling it wide open. You destroyed it the moment you decided extreme greed was more important than basic integrity. Your 5 minutes are up. Get out of my apartment. Richard stared at me, his chest heaving with barely contained rage. He snatched the legal document off the counter and pointed a trembling finger at my face. You will regret this. I will tie you up in corporate litigation so fast your head will spin. I will claim you are mentally unfit to manage an estate. I will take that property from you by force. Good luck with that, I said. Now leave. Patricia grabbed Richard's arm, pulling him toward the hallway. She glared at me, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated venom. You are nothing, Kira. You will always be nothing. I watched them march down the hallway, their angry footsteps echoing loudly. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt, sliding the chain back into place. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my mind was sharper than ever. Richard was desperate, which meant he was going to make severe mistakes. He thought I was just a stubborn daughter throwing a tantrum over a rotting house. He had absolutely no idea that I held the cryptographic key to his entire criminal enterprise, and I was just getting started. The sun had barely risen over the city skyline when my phone vibrated loudly against my nightstand. The caller ID displayed my brother's name. Derek rarely called me. Usually he just sent passive-aggressive text messages on holidays or completely ignored my existence. I let the phone vibrate twice before answering. Derek's voice was smooth and practiced, carrying that polished, effortless charm he used to coax investors out of their money. Kira, hey, listen. I know things got completely out of hand last night with Mom and Dad. They can be incredibly intense. I want to apologize for their behavior. Let us grab lunch today. Just you and me. No parents. I know a great French bistro downtown. I knew exactly what he was doing. Richard's aggressive intimidation tactics had failed miserably at my apartment, so my parents were sending in the golden boy to play the empathetic peacekeeper. I agreed to the lunch, sliding my phone into my pocket. I needed to see exactly what Derek's angle was, and more importantly, I needed him to put his threats on the record. The bistro was loud, filled with wealthy corporate executives and socialites enjoying their midday breaks. Derek sat at a secluded corner booth, swirling a glass of very expensive red wine. He wore a tailored navy blue suit, looking every bit the successful tech CEO he pretended to be. I slid into the leather booth across from him, placing my purse carefully on the table. Inside the bag, my phone was already recording the conversation. Derek leaned forward, offering a warm, sympathetic smile. You look good, Kira. I really mean that. Listen, I want to be completely honest with you. Dad is losing his mind over this Elm Street property. You know how volatile he gets when a major deal stalls. I kept my expression entirely neutral. He wants to buy the house for a fraction of what the land is worth so he can close a mega merger. I am not interested in helping him. Derek sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. It is not just about Dad, Kira. It is about my company. You know I am launching my new software platform next month. The venture capital I secured is tied directly to Harrison Holdings. If Dad's commercial real estate merger falls through, my funding gets frozen instantly. My entire startup will collapse before it even launches. I have employees relying on me. I have private investors expecting massive returns. If you hold on to that junk house, you are not just punishing Dad. You are destroying my future. I watched him carefully. It was a masterful performance. He sounded genuinely stressed and heartbroken, but I had read Grandpa Harrison's encrypted ledger. I knew Derek's startup did not have any real venture capital. It was entirely funded by the money Richard was embezzling from his private investors. Derek was not just a spoiled son throwing a pity party. He was a primary beneficiary of a massive federal crime, living off stolen funds while playing the role of a brilliant innovator. I am sorry about your company, Derek, I said, keeping my voice steady and completely cold. But my answer is the same. I am keeping Grandpa's property. The sympathetic brother routine vanished instantly. The charming smile dropped, replaced by a vicious, ugly sneer. Derek slammed his wine glass down on the table, spilling dark red drops onto the pristine white tablecloth. You have always been exactly like this, he spat, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. always so incredibly jealous. You could never stand the fact that Mom and Dad actually loved me, that they believed in my potential while you sat in the corner playing with your little calculators. I am not jealous of you, Derek, I replied calmly. Oh, please, he mocked, leaning closer across the table. You are an unhinged spinster living in a depressing little apartment. You have no real power in this world, so you are trying to hold my success hostage out of pure spite. You are pathetic, Kira. You think that rotting house makes you special. It just proves you are exactly what Dad said you are, a garbage collector. I reached into my purse, feeling the smooth glass surface of my phone. The hidden recording app was capturing every single word of his meltdown. Are you done? I asked. Derek pulled $100 bill from his wallet and threw it aggressively onto the table. Sign the deed over Kira, or I promise you I will make sure Dad destroys whatever pathetic little career you have left in this city. Do not test me. He slid out of the booth and stormed out of the restaurant, leaving me alone at the table. I quietly stopped the recording and immediately backed up the audio file to my secure cloud server. Derek had just threatened my livelihood and openly admitted his financial dependence on Richard's corrupt empire. It was perfect. But I knew my brother's arrogant nature. He was impatient, greedy, and fundamentally reckless. A verbal threat at a restaurant would not be the end of his tantrum. He wanted that property, and he believed I was far too weak to stop him. He would absolutely try to take matters into his own hands. I needed to be ready for his next move. I left the bistro and drove straight to an electronics supply store on the other side of town. I purchased 4 high-definition cellular connected motion-activated security cameras. They were small, discreet, and ran on independent battery power, meaning they did not need the junk house's dead electrical grid to function. I drove back to the Elm Street property. The rain from yesterday had cleared, leaving the air damp and heavy. I quickly navigated the crumbling porch and let myself inside. Working efficiently, I mounted the cameras in strategic locations. One faced the main front hallway, one pointed directly at the heavy back door in the kitchen. The other 2 were hidden high in the dark corners of Grandpa's study, positioned to capture the entire room, including the heavy Persian rug and the hidden floor safe. I tested the video feeds on my phone. The resolution was crystal clear. If anyone stepped foot inside this house, I would have them in high-definition video. I returned to my apartment as the sun began to set. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat down at my desk, opening the encrypted ledger files on my offline laptop. I needed to map out the exact flow of money from Richard's fake investment accounts directly into Derek's startup. I needed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Derek was actively laundering stolen funds. Around 2 in the morning, my phone chimed loudly on the desk. A bright red notification flashed across the screen. Motion detected. Main hallway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tapped the notification, opening the live video feed. The night vision camera illuminated the dark, dusty hallway of the junk house in a stark black and white glow. The heavy wooden back door had been violently smashed open. The frame was splintered and hanging precariously off its rusted hinges. Stepping through the debris was a figure wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, heavy work gloves, and thick boots. The figure pulled the hood down, wiping sweat from his forehead. It was Derek. I watched in silent fascination as my golden boy brother pulled a heavy steel crowbar from inside his jacket. He looked frantic, his chest heaving as he shined a tactical flashlight around the empty hallway. He was not here to negotiate or play the good son. He was here to find the physical deed, hidden cash, or anything he could steal to force my hand. I switched the camera feed to the study. A few seconds later, Derek burst through the mahogany double doors. He immediately started tearing the room apart. He used the crowbar to smash the antique wooden bookshelves against the wall, sending splintered wood flying across the dark room. He flipped the heavy desk over, ripping the drawers out and dumping decades of dust and debris everywhere. He looked like a feral animal, completely consumed by greed and blind panic. He kicked the heavy Persian rug aside, his flashlight illuminating the bare floorboards. He started smashing the crowbar against the wood, trying to pry up random planks in a desperate search for a hidden compartment. He had no idea the floor safe was right under his boots, securely locked and already emptied of its true treasure. I sat back in my desk chair, watching the live feed with a cold, triumphant smile. I hit the record button on the security app, capturing every single violent swing of the crowbar, every frantic curse word he muttered, every piece of property he willfully destroyed. Any normal person would have called the police immediately. I could have had him arrested for breaking and entering right then and there. But sending my brother to jail for a simple property crime was a massive waste of his potential. I wanted the entire family structure to burn at once. I needed to tie his desperate actions tonight directly to the federal crimes hidden in my grandfather's ledger. I watched Derek exhaust himself. He finally dropped the crowbar on the floor, kicking the wall in pure frustration before storming out of the study and disappearing through the broken back door. I downloaded the video footage and added it to the encrypted hard drive on my desk. Derek had just handed me irrefutable proof of his criminal desperation. He had broken into my property, caused thousands of dollars in damage, and proved that he was willing to break the law to protect his father's secrets. I closed the video feed and pulled the massive financial spreadsheets back onto my main monitor. The golden boy had made his aggressive move, and he had failed completely. Now it was my turn to dig into the exact corporate structures of his fake technology company. I was going to follow the numbers just like Grandpa said, and I was going to build a cage so tight that neither my brother nor my father would ever escape. The sun began to rise as I closed the security camera application on my phone. Derek had failed to find the deed, but his violent break-in gave me the exact leverage I needed. I turned my attention back to the encrypted ledger files glowing on my offline laptop. My brother had openly threatened to destroy my career if I did not surrender Grandpa Harrison's property, confident that his position as a successful tech CEO made him untouchable. It was time to prove just how fragile his glass house really was. I spent the next 6 hours doing what I do best. I followed the numbers. I mapped the exact route of the stolen investor funds. Richard had set up a complex network of offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands under the parent name Horizon Consulting. The money flowed from the Harrison Holdings private investor pool directly into Horizon, bypassing all domestic tax audits. From there, the funds were wired in massive, untraceable installments straight into the operating budget of Derek's technology startup, Apex Innovations. I dug into the public filings for Apex Innovations. Derek had zero active software products. He had no legitimate clients and no actual revenue streams. He was hosting lavish launch parties, renting premium downtown office space, and paying himself a massive 7-figure salary using the life savings of our father's private investors. It was textbook money laundering. My golden boy brother was not a brilliant entrepreneur. He was a primary beneficiary of a federal crime acting as a human washing machine for stolen cash. I compiled every wire transfer date and IP address into a master dossier, backing up the files on a secondary secure drive. By noon, the backlash from my refusal to sell the property hit me like a freight train. I walked into my downtown office to find my receptionist, Renee, looking panicked. The phones were ringing off the hook, but not with new business. Renee handed me a stack of messages, her hands shaking slightly. Our biggest client, a regional logistics firm, had just terminated our contract effective immediately. 2 other mid-sized companies had paused their audits pending an internal review. I walked into my private office and called the CEO of the logistics firm directly. He was uncomfortable but bluntly honest. Richard had personally called him that morning. My father had leveraged his massive influence in the city's financial sector to spread a vicious, highly damaging rumor. He claimed I was suffering a severe psychiatric break and that I was illegally using my forensic accounting agency to steal proprietary client data. My own father was actively destroying my professional reputation, intentionally starving my business to force me into financial submission. I ended the call and checked my personal cell phone. I had 5 new voicemails from my mother, Patricia. I put the phone on speaker and played the first one. Her voice dripped with manufactured outrage, sharp and venomous. "You are a complete disgrace to this family," she hissed through the audio. "Your father is trying to save his company and our legacy, and you are acting like a spoiled, unhinged child." He had to warn his business associates about your erratic behavior to protect them from your incompetence. Give us the deed to that property today, or we will make sure you never work as an accountant in this city again. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the rest. The psychological warfare was escalating rapidly. They were trying to isolate me, cutting off my income and my credibility, so I would have no choice but to crawl back to them and surrender my grandfather's land. Before the business day ended, a private courier marched into my agency and slapped a heavy legal packet on the reception desk. I took it into my office and sliced open the thick manila envelope. It was a formal notice from Richard's high-powered corporate attorneys. They were not just threatening me with a lawsuit over the property. They had filed a formal notice of intent to pursue a conservatorship. I read the legal jargon with a mixture of horror and dark amusement. They were petitioning the state court to declare me mentally unfit to manage my own finances or my grandfather's estate. They cited my history of isolating myself from the family and my so-called erratic business behavior as proof of psychological instability. They intended to legally strip me of my autonomy, seize the Elm Street property by force under the guise of parental protection, and lock me away in a legal nightmare for the rest of my life. It was a terrifying display of pure, unrestrained wealth and power. My parents were willing to erase my legal existence just to cover up a Ponzi scheme, but they grossly underestimated who they were dealing with. I did not panic, and I did not hire a defense lawyer to fight the conservatorship. Instead, I picked up my phone and called David Miller. David was a former forensic accounting colleague who had left the private sector 5 years ago to become a lead investigator for the FBI's white-collar crime division. We met an hour later at a nondescript diner just outside the city limits. I slid a heavy envelope and an encrypted flash drive across the sticky vinyl table. David looked at me, noting the dark circles under my eyes and my rigid posture. "What exactly am I looking at, Kira?" he asked, picking up the flash drive. "You are looking at the complete dismantling of Harrison Holdings," I said, keeping my voice low. Inside that envelope are physical copies of a shadow ledger kept by Arthur Harrison. The flash drive contains the digital routing numbers, the offshore shell company registrations, and the exact flow of $40 million in embezzled investor capital. I also included high-definition security footage of the CEO's son breaking into my property last night with a crowbar attempting to destroy evidence. David booted up his secure federal tablet and inserted the flash drive. He spent 10 minutes reviewing the top-line summary I had prepared. The diner around us was loud with clinking silverware and chatter, but the silence at our booth was absolute. I watched David's eyes widen as he scrolled through the sheer volume of fraudulent wire transfers. He stopped at the page detailing Derek's fake technology startup. "This is airtight," David said softly, looking up at me in disbelief. "You mapped the entire laundering operation down to the cent. Richard has been paying early investors with fake dividends generated from new buy-ins. If this data is verified, he is looking at decades in federal prison. I have the original physical ledger secured in a bank vault, I confirmed. The data is real. My grandfather tracked it for years. Now my father is trying to force me into a conservatorship to steal the land he needs to secure a fraudulent bailout loan. I need to know if the Bureau can move on this quickly." David closed his tablet and slipped the flash drive into his jacket pocket. "With this level of documentation, I can get federal warrants signed by a judge within 48 hours. Where is Richard right now?" I smiled, feeling the adrenaline finally overpower my exhaustion. "He is hosting the annual Harrison Holdings Charity Gala this Saturday night at the Grand Hotel. It is a black tie event. All of his wealthiest private investors, the local politicians he funds, and the high society elite will be in the same ballroom. He plans to use the gala to announce his massive new commercial real estate merger to the press." David nodded, a hard, professional edge settling into his features. "We will be there. Make sure he feels completely safe until we walk through those doors." I left the diner and drove back to my apartment. The trap was set, but I needed to provide the bait. Richard needed to believe he had utterly broken me. He needed to think his smear campaign and legal threats had forced me into submission. I opened my laptop and drafted a short, legally binding email to my father. I kept my tone defeated and desperate, playing exactly into the narrative he had constructed about me. You win, Richard. The legal threats are too much. I am losing clients and I cannot afford to fight your corporate lawyers in a conservatorship battle. I will attend the gala this weekend. I will bring the original deed to the Elm Street property and sign it over to you publicly to prove I am a team player. Just call off the lawyers and stop ruining my business. I hit send and waited. My heart pounded against my ribs as the minutes ticked by. If he suspected a trap, he might try to force the transaction privately before the event. But I knew his ego. I knew his desperate need for public validation and total control. He would not just want to take the land. He would want to humiliate me in front of his peers, showcasing my surrender as proof of his absolute dominance over the family. My phone chimed less than 5 minutes later. The reply from Richard was brief, arrogant, and dripping with victory. See you Saturday, Kira. Dress appropriately and do not be late. We have a family legacy to secure. I locked my computer and leaned back in my chair. He had taken the bait perfectly. My father and my brother thought they had won. They thought they had crushed the unhinged spinster who dared to challenge their authority. They were going to walk into that luxury ballroom expecting a coronation. Instead, they were walking into a federal prison sentence, and I was going to gladly hold the door open for them. Saturday evening arrived with an electric, nervous energy that settled deep into my bones. The Grand Hotel was completely cordoned off, a fortress of extreme wealth and power. Valets scrambled to park a seemingly endless line of luxury vehicles, while paparazzi clustered near the velvet ropes, their camera flashes illuminating the damp pavement. I handed my keys to a valet and stepped onto the red carpet. I wore a tailored, deep emerald gown that fit perfectly, my hair pulled back into a severe, elegant twist. I looked exactly like the obedient, compliant daughter Richard had ordered me to be. The grand ballroom was stunning, dripping in crystal chandeliers and towering floral arrangements. The room was packed with hundreds of the city's most powerful people. High-profile investors, local politicians, and socialites mingled over champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. A massive stage had been erected at the far end of the room, dominated by a huge digital presentation screen, displaying the Harrison Holdings logo in crisp gold lettering. I moved through the crowd, ignoring the curious glances from people who vaguely recognized me as the long-lost Harrison daughter. I spotted Patricia and Derek standing near the front of the stage. Patricia was holding court with a group of wealthy wives, sipping her champagne with a look of absolute arrogant triumph. Derek leaned against a cocktail table, looking incredibly smug, in his bespoke tuxedo, checking his reflection in the mirrored pillar next to him. They were openly gloating, assuming my presence meant I had surrendered entirely. As the string quartet faded, the room lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd as my father Richard stepped onto the stage. He looked immaculate, projecting the exact image of a powerful, benevolent corporate titan. The applause was loud and sustained. Richard smiled, raising his hands in a gesture of humble gratitude before stepping up to the glass podium. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Richard began, his voice booming smoothly through the microphone. We are here to celebrate not just the legacy of Harrison Holdings, but the incredible future we are building together. As many of you know, tonight marks the official announcement of our new commercial real estate mega merger. It is a deal that will redefine the city's skyline and guarantee historic returns for every single investor in this room. The applause swelled again. Patricia beamed from the front row. But before we discuss the financials, Richard continued, his voice shifting to a softer, more emotional register. I want to take a moment to celebrate family. The Harrison legacy has always been about unity and shared vision. My daughter Kira is here with us tonight. The spotlight swung wildly across the room, illuminating me where I stood near the center aisle. I kept my face perfectly still, a blank mask of compliance. Kira and I have had our differences, Richard said, addressing the crowd with a practiced, sorrowful smile. But tonight she has decided to honor her grandfather's memory and do the right thing for this company and this family. Kira, please join me on stage. The crowd parted, offering polite, encouraging applause as I walked down the aisle. Every step felt heavy, but my mind was laser-focused. I climbed the short stairs to the stage. Richard pulled me into a brief, aggressive hug, whispering fiercely into my ear. "Do not embarrass me, Kira. Sign the damn paper." He released me, turning back to the audience with a wide smile. He gestured to the glass podium where a heavy leather-bound legal document rested next to an expensive fountain pen. The deed transfer. He expected me to sign away my grandfather's property, the final key to his massive fraud, right there in front of everyone, cementing my total submission to his control. I walked up to the podium. I picked up the fountain pen. The room was entirely silent, waiting for the prodigal daughter to fall back into line. I looked down at the deed, then looked at my father. He gave me a sharp, commanding nod. I set the pen down. It landed on the glass podium with a sharp, resonant clack that echoed through the microphone. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out a small remote control. "I am not signing anything, Richard," I said, my voice ice cold and perfectly amplified across the silent ballroom. Richard's smile instantly vanished. He took a threatening step toward me, his eyes wide with panic. "Kira, what are you doing?" "I am honoring Grandpa Harrison's memory," I replied, turning my attention to the hundreds of powerful investors staring up at the stage in utter confusion. I pressed a button on the remote. The massive presentation screen behind us flickered. The golden Harrison Holdings logo vanished. In its place, a high-definition image of a vintage $20 bill filled the entire screen. The green ink was vivid, but the 11-character serial number was highlighted in bright glowing red. "My grandfather left me this $20 bill," I announced to the room, my voice steady and unwavering. "He told me to follow the numbers because numbers never lie." I pressed the remote again. The screen shifted rapidly. Complex financial spreadsheets, offshore routing numbers, and massive wire transfer logs populated the display. The numbers were enormous, millions upon millions of dollars. "The data you are looking at was extracted from a shadow ledger kept by Arthur Harrison," I explained, looking directly at the group of investors in the front rows. "It details exactly how Richard Harrison has been running this company for the past decade. There is no mega merger tonight. There are no historic returns. Harrison Holdings is completely bankrupt." The ballroom erupted into a chaotic murmur. People were standing up, pointing at the screen and whispering frantically. Patricia let out a loud, horrified gasp. Derek looked like he was about to be sick. "Kira, stop this right now," Richard hissed, lunging for the microphone. I blocked his hand, leaning closer to the mic. "Richard has been running a massive Ponzi scheme," I declared, projecting my voice over the rising panic in the room. "He has embezzled over $40 million of your private capital. He used your investments to fund fake dividends, purchase luxury real estate, and finance a totally fraudulent technology startup run by my brother Derek." I hit the remote a final time. The screen split into two sections. On the left was the detailed wire transfer, proving Derek's company was entirely funded by stolen investor cash. On the right was the high-definition night vision footage of Derek aggressively smashing the interior of the Elm Street property with a crowbar. "This is Derek Harrison, the CEO of Apex Innovations, violently breaking into my property 3 nights ago, attempting to destroy evidence," I stated clearly. My father desperately needed my land to secure a fraudulent bailout loan to keep this scheme afloat for a few more months. The murmur in the ballroom turned into a deafening roar. Investors were screaming, their faces red with fury and panic. Several men rushed toward the stage, demanding answers from my father. Richard was completely paralyzed, his face ashen, his eyes darting wildly around the room as his entire criminal empire collapsed in real time. Patricia was sobbing hysterically, clinging to Derek, who looked absolutely terrified. Then the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom slammed open. The chaotic shouting abruptly stopped. A line of men and women in dark suits and federal windbreakers marched into the room, their badges clearly visible. David Miller led the team, his expression hard and professional. "Federal agents," David announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Nobody move." The agents swiftly navigated through the crowd, heading straight for the stage. 2 agents flanked Derek, pulling his arms behind his back and snapping cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. He did not even struggle. He just stared blankly ahead, completely broken. David stepped onto the stage and approached my father. "Richard Harrison, you are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent." Richard did not say a word. The arrogant, powerful corporate titan was gone. He looked small, pathetic, and entirely ruined. As the federal agents led my father and my brother out of the ballroom in their expensive tuxedos, the crowd of investors erupted again, furious and betrayed. Patricia collapsed onto the carpeted floor, wailing uncontrollably, her perfect wealthy life entirely shattered. I stood on the stage, the chaos swirling around me, and felt a profound sense of absolute peace. The long nightmare was finally over. I had followed the numbers and the truth had set me completely free. 6 months after the federal raid at the Grand Hotel, the city was still reeling from the fallout. The collapse of Harrison Holdings was one of the largest corporate scandals in state history. The trial was swift and brutal, fueled by the irrefutable evidence I had provided to the FBI. Richard Harrison was convicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, effectively ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Derek, unable to handle the pressure of the investigation, quickly accepted a plea deal. He turned state's evidence against his own father in exchange for a reduced sentence of 10 years for his role in laundering the stolen funds through his fake startup. Patricia lost everything: the sprawling mansion, the luxury cars, the offshore accounts. The federal government seized it all to pay restitution to the defrauded investors. Completely ostracized by her wealthy social circle and left with nothing but her own bitter resentment, she was forced to move into a tiny, run-down rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. She tried calling me several times, demanding financial support, but I ignored every single voicemail. As for me, I finally stepped out of the long shadow my family had cast over my life. I used my own legitimately earned savings and a specialized historical restoration loan to completely rebuild Grandpa Harrison's property on Elm Street. It took months of hard, grueling work, but the results were spectacular. The rotting Victorian junk house was transformed into a stunning, modernized piece of architectural history. I kept the original oak banisters and the crown molding, blending the classic design with sleek modern glass and steel elements. I turned the massive first floor into the new expanded headquarters for my forensic accounting firm. Business was booming. The highly publicized takedown of a massive corporate Ponzi scheme had inadvertently turned me into one of the most sought-after forensic accountants in the country. Major corporations and private investors hired my firm specifically because they knew my integrity was absolutely uncompromisable. I sat at my new desk in the restored study, the afternoon sun streaming through the large, pristine windows. The heavy Persian rug was gone, replaced by polished hardwood, but the custom floor safe remained securely hidden beneath my desk, a permanent reminder of the secrets this room once held. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and looked at the wall directly across from me. Hanging in the center, perfectly illuminated by a small gallery light, was a simple, elegant black frame. Inside the glass rested the crisp, vintage 1934 $20 bill. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my coffee. My family had laughed at that $20 bill. They thought it was the ultimate insult, a final cruel joke meant to humiliate the family scapegoat. But Grandpa Harrison had known exactly what he was doing. He didn't just leave me a clue to uncover a crime. He left me the undeniable proof that my analytical mind, the very thing my family constantly mocked, was my greatest strength. He had handed me the keys to my own freedom, one 11-character serial number at a time. And as I turned back to my computer monitor, ready to dive into a new stack of financial audits, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never be underestimated again. The sun had barely risen the morning after my parents ambushed my apartment when my phone began to vibrate. I had spent the entire night cross-referencing the offshore routing numbers from Grandpa Harrison's ledger with public corporate filings. My eyes burned from staring at the bright laptop screen, but the adrenaline pulsing through my veins kept me wide awake. I looked down at my phone resting on the desk. The caller ID displayed my brother's name. Derek almost never called me. Our communication over the past decade consisted entirely of him sending a generic holiday text or demanding I contribute to whatever extravagant anniversary gift he was buying for our parents. I watched the screen flash his name for a long moment. My father's intimidation tactics had failed spectacularly the night before. It made perfect sense that they would send in the golden boy next to play the empathetic peacekeeper. I tapped the green accept button and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say a word, waiting for him to speak first. "Kira, is that you?" Derek asked. His voice was smooth and practiced. It was the exact same tone he used when pitching his fake technology startup to wealthy investors. "Listen, I know things got completely out of hand last night with Mom and Dad. They can be incredibly intense. I want to apologize for their behavior. They had no right to show up at your door like that." I kept my voice perfectly flat. "What do you want, Derek?" He let out a heavy sigh, sounding like a deeply concerned and exhausted brother. "I want to buy you lunch today, just you and me. No parents, no lawyers. I know a great upscale place downtown called Laura. Let us just sit down and talk this through. I really want to understand your side of things." I knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to corner me in a public place where I would be pressured to maintain social decorum. He wanted to use his charm to manipulate me into surrendering the deed to the Elm Street property. I agreed to the lunch, sliding my phone into my pocket after we finalized the time. I needed to see exactly what his angle was. More importantly, I needed him to put his desperation and his threats on the record. Lara was one of the most expensive and exclusive restaurants in the city. It was loud, filled with wealthy corporate executives and socialites enjoying their midday breaks. The air smelled of white truffles and expensive perfume. Derek was already waiting for me at a secluded corner booth. He was swirling a glass of very expensive red wine. He wore a tailored navy blue suit and a platinum watch, looking every bit the successful tech chief executive officer he pretended to be. I slid into the plush leather booth across from him. I placed my large black purse carefully on the table, adjusting its angle slightly. Inside the bag, my phone was already running a hidden recording application, capturing every sound. Derek leaned forward, offering a warm and sympathetic smile. "You look really good, Kira. I genuinely mean that. It has been too long since we just sat down together." I ordered a glass of ice water from the waiter, who immediately appeared at our table. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Derek. Why am I here?" Derek frowned slightly, performing a look of wounded innocence. "I want to be completely honest with you. Dad is losing his mind over this Elm Street property. You know how volatile and demanding he gets when a major deal stalls. I am actually on your side here. I think it is terrible how they treated you at the will reading. Grandpa leaving you that house was his way of giving you something of your own, and they should respect that." I kept my expression entirely neutral. He wants to buy the house for a fraction of what the land is actually worth, so he can close a mega merger. I am not interested in helping him expand his corporate empire. Derek sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He took another sip of his wine, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is not just about Dad, Kira. It is about my company. You know I am launching my new software platform next month. The venture capital I secured is tied directly to Harrison Holdings. If Dad's commercial real estate merger falls through, my funding gets frozen instantly. My entire startup will collapse before it even launches." He reached across the table, attempting to place his hand over mine. I pulled my hand back, resting it in my lap. "I have dozens of employees relying on me." Derek continued, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I have private investors expecting massive returns on their trust in me. If you hold on to that junk house, you are not just punishing Dad for his bad behavior. You are destroying my future. You are putting innocent people out of work. Please, Kira, sign the deed over to him. Do it for me. I promise I will make sure Dad compensates you fairly once my company goes public." I watched him carefully. It was a masterful performance. He sounded genuinely stressed and heartbroken, but I had spent the entire night reading Grandpa Harrison's encrypted ledger. I knew Derek's startup did not have any real venture capital. It was a complete ghost ship. It was entirely funded by the money Richard was actively embezzling from his private investors. Derek was not a brilliant entrepreneur facing an unfortunate corporate delay. He was the primary beneficiary of a massive federal crime. He was living off stolen funds while playing the role of an innovator. He needed me to sign over the land so Richard could secure the fraudulent bailout loan necessary to keep the Ponzi scheme running. I played dumb wanting him to dig his own grave on the recording. So your entire business relies on Dad closing this one specific real estate deal, I asked, tilting my head in feigned confusion. That sounds like a very fragile business model, Derek. Why can you not just get funding from a different bank? Because the market is incredibly tight right now. Derek snapped, his frustration briefly cracking through his charming facade. He caught himself and forced his smile back into place. Dad is my primary backer. We are keeping the wealth inside the family. It is a smart financial strategy, but it requires all of us to row in the same direction. I need you to be a team player, Kira. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. I am sorry about your company, Derek, but my answer is the same as it was last night. I am keeping Grandpa's property. I am not signing the deed over to anyone. The sympathetic breather routine vanished instantly. The charming smile dropped from his face, replaced by a vicious and ugly sneer. His true nature, the arrogant and entitled golden boy, finally broke through to the surface. Derek slammed his wineglass down on the table, spilling dark red drops onto the pristine white tablecloth. The sharp sound made several people at nearby tables turn their heads to look at us. You have always been exactly like this, he spat. His voice dropped to a harsh and venomous whisper. You are always so incredibly jealous of me. You could never stand the fact that Mom and Dad actually loved me. You could never accept that they believed in my potential while you sat in the corner playing with your little calculators. I am not jealous of you, Derek, I replied calmly. My eyes locked directly on his. Oh, please, he mocked, leaning his upper body aggressively across the table. You are an unhinged spinster living in a depressing little apartment. You have absolutely no real power in this world, so you are trying to hold my success hostage out of pure spite. You are pathetic, Kira. You think holding on to that rotting house makes you special. It just proves you are exactly what Dad said you are. A glorified garbage collector who refuses to let go of the past. I did not flinch. I let his insults wash over me. Every single word he said was currently being captured by the hidden recording application in my purse. You are actively trying to destroy this family because you are bitter. Derek continued, his face flushed red with genuine rage. You have spent your entire life being a massive disappointment. You audit other people's money because you are completely incapable of making any real money of your own. Now you finally have a chance to do something useful for this family, and you are throwing a temper tantrum. Are you quite done? I asked, my voice remaining perfectly even and unaffected by his verbal assault. Derek pulled a crisp $100 bill from his leather wallet and threw it aggressively onto the table. It landed next to his spilled wine. Sign the deed over, Kira. Or I promise you I will make sure Dad destroys whatever pathetic little accounting career you have left in this city. He will ruin your reputation so thoroughly that you will not even be able to get a job managing a fast food cash register. Do not test me. I looked at the $100 bill on the table, then looked back at my brother's furious face. He truly believed he held all the power. He believed his threats would terrify me into submission. He was so completely blinded by his own entitlement that he could not see the trap closing tightly around his neck. I stood up from the plush leather booth. I picked up my purse, making sure not to jostle the recording device inside. Keep your money, Derek, I said, looking down at him with cold detachment. You are going to need every single penny of it very soon. I turned and walked out of the elegant restaurant, leaving him fuming alone at the table. The lunchtime crowd parted around me as I moved toward the exit. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air and quietly stopped the recording on my phone. I immediately backed up the audio file to my secure cloud server. Derek had just threatened my livelihood and openly admitted his complete financial dependence on Richard's corrupt empire. His manipulation had failed, and his vicious true colors were now permanently documented. I walked to my car, parked a few blocks away, my mind racing with the possibilities this new evidence presented. I unlocked my door and slid into the driver's seat, pulling out my laptop bag from the back. I needed to act fast. Derek was reckless and prone to explosive anger when he did not get his way. I knew his temper would not cool down after this disastrous lunch. He would feel challenged and humiliated, which meant he would likely take physical action next. I started the engine, pulling away from the curb. My brother thought he was walking away from that lunch as the dominant force in our family hierarchy. He believed his cruel words would break my spirit. He had no idea that his aggressive threats were just another piece of the puzzle I was building against him. I drove back toward my apartment, already planning my next defensive maneuver. I was going to need security cameras, and I was going to need them immediately. The golden boy was about to make a massive mistake, and I was going to capture every single second of it. I navigated my car through the dense midday traffic, heading straight for a specialized electronics supply store on the west side of the city. Derek had made his intentions perfectly clear at the restaurant. He was cornered. His fake technology startup was entirely dependent on Richard closing a fraudulent real estate deal, and my refusal to sell Grandpa Harrison's property was blocking their access to that stolen capital. My brother was a man who had never been told no in his entire life. He was not going to simply accept defeat and walk away. He was going to escalate, and he was going to do it fast. I walked into the electronics store and bypassed the consumer-grade equipment, heading straight for the professional surveillance section. I needed hardware that was entirely self-sufficient. The Elm Street property had been disconnected from the city power grid for over a decade, and there was no active wireless internet connection. I purchased 4 high-definition motion-activated security cameras equipped with military-grade night vision. They operated on long-lasting lithium-ion batteries and utilized their own independent cellular data connections to stream live video directly to a secure cloud server. They were expensive, but I gladly handed over my credit card. This was an investment in my own survival. The sky was turning a bruised, stormy gray as I pulled up to the curb outside the rotting Victorian house on Elm Street. The neighborhood was completely deserted, the old industrial factories standing like silent sentinels in the fading afternoon light. I grabbed the heavy shopping bag from the passenger seat, pushed through the rusted iron gate, and quickly made my way up the creaking wooden steps. I unlocked the heavy oak front door, slipped inside, and immediately engaged the deadbolt behind me. The air inside the house was thick with dust and the distinct smell of damp wood. I did not waste any time. I opened my bag and began the installation process. I mounted the first camera high in the corner of the main entryway, angling the lens to capture anyone coming through the front door or moving toward the central staircase. I walked through the dark hallway to the back of the house and installed the second camera above the kitchen threshold, pointing it directly at the heavy wooden back door. If Derek tried to force his way inside, he would likely choose the rear entrance to avoid being seen from the street. The final 2 cameras were reserved for the most critical room in the house. I pushed open the mahogany double doors and stepped into my grandfather's old study. The heavy Persian rug still lay in the center of the room, covering the concealed floor safe I had emptied just days ago. I positioned the third camera on top of an antique bookshelf, giving it a wide, sweeping view of the entire room. I mounted the fourth camera directly across from it, hidden within the ornate woodwork near the ceiling. It provided a perfect, unobstructed downward angle of the floor safe area. I pulled out my phone and synced the devices to my secure application. The high-definition video feeds popped onto my screen one by one. The resolution was incredibly sharp, picking up the finest details of the peeling wallpaper and dust-covered floorboards. I adjusted the motion sensor sensitivity to maximum and set the application to send an aggressive overriding alarm to my phone the instant any movement was detected. The trap was officially set. I packed up my empty boxes, wiped my fingerprints from the surfaces I had touched, and quietly exited the house. By the time I returned to my apartment, night had fallen completely over the city. I locked my door, changed into comfortable clothes, and brewed a strong pot of black coffee. I sat down at my desk, booted up my offline laptop, and opened the encrypted ledger files. While I waited for Derek to make his move, I had plenty of forensic work to do. I spent the next several hours meticulously tracing the offshore routing numbers, mapping the exact flow of money from Richard's private investor pool straight into the operating budget of Apex Innovations. The sheer volume of the embezzlement was staggering, but my focus remained absolute. At exactly 2:14 in the morning, the silence of my apartment was shattered. My phone emitted a piercing, high-pitched alarm that made my heart jump violently against my ribs. The screen flashed bright red, illuminating my dark office. A bold notification banner dominated the display. Motion detected. Rear entrance. Motion detected. Study. I snatched the phone off the desk and immediately tapped the notification. The secure application opened, loading the live video feeds from the Elm Street property. The night vision technology bathed the screen in a stark, high-contrast black and white glow. I selected the camera facing the back of the house and watched the footage in real time. The heavy wooden rear door was violently shuddering in its frame. Someone outside was hitting it with massive, aggressive force. A second later, the wood splintered with a sickening crack. The deadbolt tore free from the rotted doorframe and the door flew open, slamming hard against the interior wall. A figure stepped through the debris into the kitchen. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, heavy tactical work gloves, and thick leather boots. He paused for a moment, shining a bright tactical flashlight across the empty room, his chest heaving with exertion. He reached up and pulled the hood back, wiping a layer of sweat from his forehead. It was Derek. The golden boy of the family, the brilliant tech chief executive officer, was currently committing a felony breaking and entering. I sat perfectly still in my desk chair, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. I hit the master record button on the security application, ensuring that every single frame of video was being actively saved to both my phone and my remote cloud server. Derek moved quickly through the kitchen and down the main hallway, completely unaware that multiple high-definition lenses were tracking his every movement. He held a heavy, solid steel crowbar in his right hand. He did not look like a polished businessman anymore. He looked frantic, desperate, and entirely unhinged. He was operating on pure panic, driven by the terrifying realization that his fraudulent company was about to collapse if he did not secure this property for our father. I switched the video feed to the cameras inside the study. A moment later, the mahogany double doors burst open. Derek marched into the center of the room, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He started tearing the space apart with terrifying aggression. He swung the heavy steel crowbar into the antique wooden bookshelves, smashing the fragile wood into jagged splinters. He swept his arm across the ledges, knocking decades of accumulated dust and debris onto the floor. He was looking for the deed. He firmly believed that since I had not signed the property over, the physical paperwork, or perhaps a stash of hidden cash, must still be concealed inside the house. He moved toward the heavy wooden desk against the far wall. He grabbed the edge of the solid oak structure and heaved with all his body weight, flipping the massive desk entirely upside down. The heavy piece of furniture crashed against the floorboards with a violent thud. Derek ripped the drawers completely out of their tracks, throwing them across the room when he found them empty. He kicked the shattered wood, muttering furious, aggressive curses that the camera microphones picked up with crystal clarity. Watching him completely lose his mind was fascinating. This was the brother my parents had praised my entire life. This was the man who had called me an unhinged spinster just hours ago at a luxury restaurant. Now he was destroying a historic property in the middle of the night like a feral animal. Derek turned his attention to the floor. He kicked the heavy Persian rug, dragging it forcefully toward the corner of the room. He pointed his flashlight at the bare floorboards, examining the wood. He dropped to his knees, gripping his crowbar tightly. He jammed the sharp steel edge of the tool into the tight seam between two floorboards and pushed down with all his strength. The old wood splintered and cracked under the immense pressure. He was positioned directly on top of the concealed floor safe. I watched as he frantically pried up piece after piece of the historic hardwood, desperately tearing the floor apart in a blind search for a hidden compartment. He was destroying the very architecture of the room, completely unaware that the safe beneath his boots was already empty, its devastating secrets resting securely on the desk right in front of me. A normal person would have picked up the phone and dialed emergency services immediately. I could have easily dispatched a dozen police cruisers to Elm Street and had my brother arrested for felony trespassing and destruction of property right then and there. It would have been incredibly satisfying to see his mugshot on the morning news. But I am a forensic accountant. I look at the big picture. Having Derek arrested for a simple property crime was a massive waste of his potential as a target. Richard would simply deploy his high-powered corporate lawyers, bail his golden boy out of jail by sunrise, and sweep the entire incident under the rug. I did not want a minor trespassing charge. I wanted the entire corrupt family empire to burn to the ground at the exact same time. I needed to tie Derek's violent desperation tonight directly to the massive federal crimes hidden inside my grandfather's ledger. I watched the video feed for another 20 minutes. Derek exhausted himself completely. Covered in sweat and dirt, he stood in the middle of the destroyed study, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He looked around at the splintered wood and overturned furniture, realizing he had found absolutely nothing. He threw the heavy steel crowbar against the wall in a final fit of pure rage, letting out a loud, frustrated scream that echoed through the empty house. Defeated and empty-handed, Derek turned around and stormed out of the study. I switched the camera feed to the kitchen and watched him march back out through the broken rear entrance, disappearing into the dark, damp night. I let out a slow, steady breath. I stopped the recording on my security application. The system immediately finalized the high-definition video files and successfully synced them to my encrypted cloud backup. I downloaded a secondary copy directly to my offline laptop, transferring the massive video files onto the secure flash drive that held Grandpa Harrison's shadow ledger. I leaned back in my desk chair, staring at the frozen image of my brother holding a crowbar in my grandfather's ruined study. Derek had just handed me irrefutable proof of his criminal desperation. He had broken into my property, caused thousands of dollars in malicious damage, and proved beyond any reasonable doubt that he was willing to break the law to protect his father's secrets. I closed the video player and pulled the massive financial spreadsheets back onto my main monitor. The golden boy had made his aggressive, violent move, and he had failed completely. Now it was my turn to dig into the exact corporate structures of his fake technology company. I was going to follow the numbers just like my grandfather instructed. I was going to build a legal and financial cage so impeccably tight that neither my brother nor my father would ever be able to escape it. I took a sip of my cold coffee, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I prepared to launch the next phase of my counteroffensive. I sat staring at the frozen image of Derek on my monitor, the crowbar still gripped tightly in his gloved hand. The anger I felt was sharp, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating focus. Derek had made a massive mistake, but handing him over to the local police for breaking and entering would be a tactical error. Richard would simply deploy his high-priced corporate lawyers, bail his golden boy out before sunrise, and sweep the entire incident under the rug. I did not want a minor trespassing charge. I wanted the entire corrupt family empire to burn to the ground at the exact same time. I needed to connect Derek's desperate, violent actions tonight directly to the federal crimes hidden inside my grandfather's ledger. I closed the security camera application and pulled up the decrypted files from Grandpa Harrison's lockbox. The shadow ledger was incredibly detailed, but it required painstaking forensic analysis to follow the money trail completely. I brewed another pot of black coffee and settled in for the night. My eyes burned from staring at the bright screen, but the adrenaline pulsing through my veins kept me wide awake. I began by isolating the offshore routing numbers associated with Horizon. Consulting the primary shell company Richard had established in the Cayman Islands. According to Grandpa's records, millions of dollars had been funneled from Harrison Holdings' private investor pool directly into Horizon over the past 4 years. It was a classic embezzlement structure designed to bypass domestic tax audits and hide the missing capital from regulatory oversight. But the money did not just sit in the Cayman Islands. It had to be washed before it could be used to fund my family's lavish lifestyle. I needed to find the exact mechanism Richard was using to clean the stolen funds and bring them back into the United States. I opened a second monitor and accessed public corporate filings, searching for any entities connected to my brother. Derek was the proud founder and chief executive officer of Apex Innovations, a technology startup that had supposedly secured massive venture capital funding over the past 2 years. My parents constantly bragged about his entrepreneurial brilliance, citing Apex as proof that Derek was a visionary business leader. I pulled up Apex Innovations and Corporation documents and cross-referenced the listed investors with the data in Grandpa's ledger. It took me nearly 3 hours to untangle the complex web of dummy corporations and blind trusts, but when I finally cracked the structure, the truth was absolutely devastating. Apex Innovations did not have a single legitimate venture capital investor. The company had no active software products, no real clients, and absolutely zero actual revenue streams. The massive influx of cash that Derek had been using to rent premium downtown office space, host extravagant launch parties, and pay himself a seven-figure salary was not venture capital. It was the stolen money from Harrison Holdings. I traced the wire transfers line by line. The funds moved from the Harrison Holdings investor pool straight into the Horizon Consulting accounts in the Cayman Islands, and then were wired in massive, untraceable installments directly into the operating budget of Apex Innovations. Derek was using his startup to clean the stolen cash, officially registering the embezzled funds as legitimate business investments. My brother was not just a spoiled, arrogant beneficiary living off his father's wealth. He was an active, willing participant in a massive federal money laundering operation. He was the human washing machine for Richard's Ponzi scheme. I leaned back in my desk chair, running my hands over my tired face. The sheer scale of the fraud was staggering. My family had built their entire identity on the illusion of immense wealth and success, but it was all a house of cards constructed with stolen money. And they had the audacity to call me a disappointment. They had mocked my career, belittled my apartment, and demanded I surrender my grandfather's property to save their legacy. Their legacy was a federal crime. I compiled every wire transfer date and IP address into a master dossier. I linked the offshore routing numbers directly to the Apex Innovations bank accounts, proving beyond any reasonable doubt that Derek was knowingly receiving and spending embezzled funds. I saved the comprehensive report to my secure offline drive, backing it up alongside the high-definition security footage of his break-in. I now had the golden boy dead to rights. He thought his position as a successful tech chief executive officer made him untouchable. He believed his cruel threats at the restaurant would intimidate me into silence. He had no idea that I had just mapped out the exact corporate structure of his criminal enterprise, and I was going to use it to destroy him. As the sun began to rise over the city skyline, my phone vibrated loudly on the desk. I glanced at the screen, expecting another angry message from my mother or a desperate threat from Derek. Instead, the caller ID displayed the name of one of my most reliable clients, the chief financial officer of a regional logistics firm. I picked up the phone, forcing my voice to sound bright and professional despite my exhaustion. "Good morning, Robert. What can I do for you today?" Robert sounded uncomfortable. His voice lacked its usual friendly warmth, carrying a sharp edge of hesitation. "Kira, listen. I am calling to inform you that we are terminating our auditing contract with your agency effective immediately." I froze, my hand tightening around the phone. "Excuse me, Robert. Is there an issue with the quarterly reports we submitted last week?" "No, the reports were fine," Robert replied quickly, sounding increasingly defensive. "This is a higher-level corporate decision. We just need to move in a different direction. I will have accounting send over the final payment for your services today." He hung up before I could ask any further questions. I stared at the phone in stunned silence. The logistics firm was my largest account. Losing them was a significant financial blow to my agency, but the abrupt, evasive nature of the termination made absolutely no sense. I had saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax liabilities over the past 2 years. My phone rang again. This time it was the managing partner of a mid-sized commercial real estate firm, another major client. "Kira, I am sorry, but we have to pause our contract with you," the partner said, his tone blunt and completely unsympathetic. "We are conducting an internal review of all our external vendors, and we cannot move forward with your audits right now." I felt a cold knot of dread form in my stomach. 2 major contracts terminated within 10 minutes. This was not a coincidence. Someone was intentionally targeting my business. I immediately called my receptionist, Renee. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. Kira, it is a nightmare here. The phones are ringing off the hook. 3 more clients just called to suspend their accounts. They will not give me a straight answer, but one of them mentioned hearing some very disturbing rumors about our agency's data security. Rumors, I asked, my mind racing. What kind of rumors? Renee hesitated clearly, afraid to repeat what she had heard. The client said they were warned that you are suffering a severe psychiatric break. They were told that you are acting highly erratically and that you are illegally using your forensic accounting access to steal proprietary client data. Kira, they think you are unstable and dangerous. The pieces violently clicked into place. The sudden cancellations, the coordinated malicious rumors about my mental health and professional integrity. This was not random bad luck. This was a targeted, aggressive strike. Richard. My father was using his massive influence in the city's financial sector to systematically destroy my professional reputation. He was calling his wealthy business associates, spreading vicious career-ending lies to intentionally starve my business. He knew he could not force me to sign over the Elm Street property through intimidation alone, so he was actively cutting off my income to force me into total financial submission. I told Renee to hold all calls and immediately drove to my downtown office. The atmosphere in the agency was tense and quiet. I walked straight into my private office and closed the door, my hands shaking with a mixture of pure rage and sharp, calculated focus. My desk phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. It was Patricia. I hit the speaker button, refusing to pick up the receiver. Well, Kira, my mother's voice flowed through the speaker, dripping with a venomous, triumphant satisfaction. I hear you are having a very difficult morning at the office. I kept my voice perfectly flat. You and Richard are calling my clients and spreading lies. You are committing tortious interference. We are simply warning our friends in the business community about your unfortunate mental decline. Patricia countered smoothly, her tone shifting to mock concern. We are deeply worried about you, sweetheart. Your erratic behavior, isolating yourself from the family, refusing to cooperate with your father's business deals. It is clear you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs, let alone auditing other people's money. I recorded the call, ensuring her threats were captured clearly. You think destroying my business will force me to give you Grandpa's land? Patricia laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. We do not think it, Kira. We know it. You have no powerful connections in this city. You have no real influence. Once your little agency goes bankrupt, you will have no choice but to accept your father's generous offer. Give us the deed to that property today, or we will make sure you never work as an accountant in this city again. I did not respond. I simply reached out and tapped the end call button, cutting off her triumphant laughter. The psychological warfare was escalating rapidly. They were trying to isolate me, breaking down my credibility and my livelihood until I surrendered. But they grossly underestimated who they were dealing with. They thought they were crushing a helpless, unhinged spinster. They had absolutely no idea that I held the cryptographic key to their entire criminal enterprise. I had the ledger. I had the offshore routing numbers. I had the security footage of Derek breaking into my property. And I had the absolute proof that Apex Innovations was a massive money laundering operation. Richard and Patricia had just declared all-out war on my life. I was not going to panic, and I was not going to surrender. I was going to use their aggressive arrogance to build a trap so perfect they would walk right into it with smiles on their faces. I opened my secure email server, preparing to reach out to the one contact I knew could help me turn this evidence into a federal indictment. The smear campaign had begun, but I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on the Harrison family legacy. I sat staring at the blank draft on my secure email server. The cursor blinked steadily against the bright white screen. I was minutes away from sending the encrypted files to my contact at the Federal Bureau, but a sharp analytical instinct made me pause. To hand this over to federal authorities, the dossier needed to be absolutely flawless. More importantly, I needed to legally protect myself from the immediate fallout of my father's psychological warfare. The smear campaign had indeed begun. But before I dropped the nuclear bomb on the Harrison family legacy, I had to meticulously quantify the exact blast radius of their attacks against my agency. I locked my computer and walked out of my private office. The atmosphere in the reception area was suffocating. Renee was gripping the edge of her desk, her eyes wide with mounting panic. The multi-line phone system was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was not just the logistics firm and the commercial real estate partners. The infection was spreading rapidly through my entire client roster. Richard was effectively leveraging his massive network of country club executives, board members, and charity gala socialites. He was systematically poisoning the well. I stood beside Renee and listened as she fielded another call, this one from a mid-sized manufacturing company we had audited for 3 years. The client was demanding the immediate return of all their physical files, citing sudden severe concerns about our data security protocols. I placed a calming hand on Renee's shoulder. I instructed her to stop fighting the cancellations. I told her to route every single incoming call directly to my personal voicemail system. I did not want her absorbing the brunt of my father's toxicity, and more importantly, I wanted their exact words recorded. Richard operated like a phantom in these situations. He rarely left a direct paper trail. He utilized whispers in exclusive VIP lounges and casual remarks over high-stakes golf games. He planted the seeds of doubt, letting his wealthy associates do the heavy lifting. The rumor was insidious and highly damaging. He was telling the financial elite of the city that I was suffering a complete psychological collapse, that I was unstable, and that I was illegally using my forensic accounting access to steal proprietary corporate data. I retreated to my office and pulled out a fresh legal pad. For the next 4 hours, I acted as a forensic accountant on my own life. I began drafting a comprehensive loss impact statement. Every time the voicemail light blinked on my desk phone, I documented the exact timestamp, the client's name, and the specific reason they provided for terminating their contract. The financial bleeding was catastrophic. I was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in projected revenue by the hour. A lesser person, the frightened 22-year-old college dropout my parents had thrown onto the street, would have crumbled under the sheer weight of this targeted destruction. But I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, surgical precision taking over my mind. Every lost client was another count of tortious interference. Every canceled contract was quantifiable, undeniable financial damage that I would eventually extract directly from Richard's remaining assets in a civil court. While Richard used his corporate proxies to destroy my livelihood, my mother could not resist the urge to handle things personally. Patricia weaponized her maternal status, using her own voice to deliver the most vicious threats. Over the next 48 hours, my personal cell phone inbox completely filled with her incoming voicemails. I sat at my desk playing them one by one, transcribing her vitriol into a sworn legal affidavit format. "Kira, you are a complete disgrace to the Harrison name." One voicemail began, her voice echoing shrilly from the speaker. "Your father is simply protecting our dear friends from your gross incompetence. You will never work as an accountant in this city again unless you do exactly as we say." Another message delivered at 3 in the morning was even more unhinged. Patricia called me a pathetic, jealous spinster who was trying to extort her own family out of pure spite. She explicitly stated that the character assassination would continue intensifying every single day until I was entirely homeless and begging for their help. "Sign the deed over to your father," she hissed into the receiver, "or I will personally make sure your reputation is so thoroughly ruined that you will not be able to get a job scrubbing floors." I saved every single audio file to a secure, redundant server. I exported the digital metadata, capturing the exact time and origin of each aggressive call. I did not shed a single tear listening to her cruel words. The mother who had abandoned me years ago was simply handing me the exact ammunition I needed to bury her. The assault did not stop with phone calls. Richard's corporate cronies and junior partners began sending a barrage of malicious emails directly to my agency's public inbox. They were thinly veiled as concerned inquiries about my mental health, but they explicitly copied my few remaining clients on the email threads to intentionally seed doubt and panic. They asked if I needed psychiatric references. They demanded confirmation that their financial data was safe from my erratic behavior. It was a coordinated, multi-front attack designed to break my spirit and force me into immediate submission. I archived every single digital footprint. I printed the emails and added them to a rapidly growing binder on my desk. I built a comprehensive chronological timeline of their extortion attempt. Column A listed the exact time and date Derek had aggressively demanded the property deed at the downtown bistro. Column B tracked the exact moments Richard's business associates began canceling my agency's contracts. Column C logged the precise timestamps of Patricia's threatening voicemails, demanding the property in exchange for stopping the smear campaign. The mathematical correlation was absolutely undeniable. This was not a random string of bad business luck. It was a highly organized, malicious conspiracy to commit extortion through severe defamation and tortious interference. I was building a civil case so robust, so heavily documented, that no corporate defense attorney in the country could ever hope to dismantle it. I calculated the exact monetary value of the contracts I had lost over the past 48 hours. The total exceeded $1.2 million in annual revenue. My parents thought they were starving me out. In reality, they were just adding a massive civil restitution payout to the looming federal criminal charges. I took the thick binder of documented defamation and placed it gently next to the encrypted hard drive containing Grandpa Harrison's shadow ledger. The weapon was now fully loaded. I had the undeniable proof of Richard's $40 million Ponzi scheme. I had the high-definition security footage of Derek's violent break-in at the Elm Street property. I had the irrefutable data proving Derek's tech startup was a massive money laundering operation. And now I had a meticulously documented trail of extortion, defamation, and corporate sabotage orchestrated by my own parents. I walked over to the large window in my private office and looked out at the bustling city below. My family believed they held all the cards. They believed their vast wealth and social influence made them entirely untouchable. They thought the quiet, plain daughter they had mocked and discarded was currently sitting in her office sobbing over her ruined business and preparing to surrender the deed. They had no idea that I had just weaponized every single one of their attacks. I turned back to my desk and woke up my laptop screen. The secure email draft to my contact at the Federal Bureau was still open, waiting for the final attachments. I compressed the defamation timeline, the audio files of Patricia's threats, and the lost contract valuations into a single encrypted folder. I added it to the master dossier. The smear campaign had cost me dearly in the short term, but it had provided the final nails for their coffins. I was finally ready to execute the trap. I pressed the send button on my secure email client, dispatching the preliminary encrypted message to my contact at the Federal Bureau. But before the confirmation notification could even flash across my screen, a sharp, aggressive knock hammered against the heavy glass door of my private office. Renee, my receptionist, stood there looking completely terrified. Beside her stood a tall man in a cheap gray suit holding a massive, thick stack of legal documents. He stepped past Renee without waiting for an invitation and dropped the heavy stack of manila folders directly onto my desk. "You have been served," he stated flatly, turning on his heel and walking out of the agency. I stared at the thick stack of paper. I did not panic. I calmly dismissed Renee, assuring her everything was under control, and locked my office door. I sat down and sliced open the top envelope. The header on the document bore the embossed logo of the most ruthless and expensive corporate litigation firm in the city. Richard was no longer just relying on whispered rumors and canceled contracts. He had officially launched his legal strike. It was a formal cease and desist order paired with a massive, terrifyingly detailed petition for a permanent legal conservatorship. I read through the legal jargon with a mixture of cold, analytical detachment and sheer disbelief at my father's audacity. Richard and Patricia had formally petitioned the state court to declare me mentally unfit to manage my own finances, my business, and my grandfather's estate. The document was a masterclass in psychological projection and character assassination. They claimed I was suffering from a severe, undiagnosed psychotic break. They cited my long history of isolating myself from the family as proof of my inability to maintain normal social relationships. They argued that my refusal to sell the Elm Street property, which they labeled a dangerous and toxic liability, was evidence of severe financial delusion. The petition requested an emergency injunction to immediately strip me of my autonomy. Richard wanted the court to grant him total control over all my assets, my bank accounts, and most importantly, the deed to my grandfather's land. They intended to legally erase my independence and lock me in a bureaucratic nightmare for the rest of my life, all to cover up a massive Ponzi scheme. It was the ultimate display of ruthless corporate power. A normal person would have crumbled under the weight of this threat. Facing a team of high-priced lawyers determined to prove you insane is a terrifying prospect. But I just smiled. Richard had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle. By filing this fraudulent petition, he had committed perjury and abuse of the legal system, adding yet another layer of verifiable crimes to his growing federal indictment. I picked up my phone and dialed a highly secure number I had memorized years ago. The line rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "David Miller," the voice said. "David it is, Kira," I replied. "I need an immediate, secure, physical meeting. I have a package that requires federal processing today." David was a former forensic accounting colleague from my early days in the industry. He had left the private sector 5 years ago to become a lead investigator for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI's white-collar crime division. He knew my capabilities, and he knew I would never call his secure line unless the situation was absolutely critical. He gave me an address for a brutalist government annex building on the outskirts of the city and told me to be there in exactly 1 hour. I packed the original handwritten ledger into a heavy titanium lockbox. I placed the encrypted hard drive, the flash drives containing the security footage of Derek's violent break in the audio recordings of my mother's extortion attempts, and the detailed tracing of the Cayman Islands serial number funds into a secure briefcase. I grabbed the conservatorship petition my father had just served me, adding it to the stack of evidence. The drive to the federal annex was quiet and tense. I parked in the designated secure lot and navigated through 2 layers of metal detectors before reaching the sterile, windowless conference room where David was waiting. He looked exactly the same as I remembered, sharp, observant, and entirely no nonsense. I placed the titanium lockbox and the briefcase onto the metal table between us. "What exactly am I looking at, Kira?" David asked, noting the heavy security locks on the box. "You are looking at the complete and total dismantling of Harrison Holdings," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "Inside that box is a physical shadow ledger maintained by Arthur Harrison before his death. The drives contain the digital routing numbers, the offshore shell company registrations, and the exact dollar-for-dollar flow of $40 million in embezzled investor capital. I also included high-definition security footage of the CEO's son violently breaking into my property to destroy evidence, along with recorded extortion attempts from the CEO's wife." David sat forward, his professional demeanor slipping into genuine shock. He opened the briefcase and booted up his secure federal tablet, inserting the primary flash drive. The room was absolutely silent, except for the hum of the ventilation system. I watched his eyes dart rapidly across the screen as he scrolled through the sheer volume of fraudulent wire transfers, the fake dividend payments, and the money laundering pipeline flowing directly into Derek's fake technology startup. He stopped at the summary page I had prepared, staring at the final deficit number. $40 million, he said softly, looking up at me in absolute disbelief. "You mapped the entire laundering operation down to the cent. This is not just a corporate discrepancy. This is a federal slam dunk. If this data is verified, Richard Harrison is looking at decades in a federal penitentiary." "The data is real," I confirmed. "My grandfather tracked it for years. I verified the offshore accounts myself using the serial number from a vintage $20 bill he left me as a cryptographic key. Now my father is trying to force me into a fraudulent legal conservatorship to steal the land he desperately needs to secure a bailout loan." I handed David the thick legal petition I had received that morning. He is trying to erase my legal existence to cover his tracks. I need to know if the Bureau can move on this immediately. David closed his tablet and slipped the flash drives into a secure federal evidence bag. With this level of meticulous documentation, I can get federal warrants signed by a federal judge within 48 hours. The SEC and the FBI will coordinate a joint strike. Where is Richard right now? I felt a surge of cold, calculated triumph. He is hosting the annual Harrison Holdings Charity Gala this coming Saturday night at the Grand Hotel. It is a highly publicized black tie event. All of his wealthiest private investors, the local politicians he funds, and the high society elite of the city will be in the very same ballroom. He plans to use the gala to announce his massive new commercial real estate merger to the press. David nodded, a hard predatory edge settling into his features. We will be there. Make sure he feels completely safe and victorious until we walk through those doors. Do whatever you have to do to keep him comfortable. I left the federal annex and drove back to my apartment. The federal trap was officially set, but I needed to provide the perfect bait. Richard needed to believe he had utterly broken my spirit. He needed to think his vicious smear campaign, his lost contracts, and his terrifying legal threats had forced me into absolute submission. I opened my laptop and drafted a short, legally binding email addressed to my father, deliberately copying his lead corporate attorney. I kept my tone defeated, exhausted, and completely compliant. I played exactly into the pathetic narrative he had constructed about me. Richard, you win. The legal threats are too much. I am losing all my clients and I cannot afford to fight your corporate lawyers in a drawn-out conservatorship battle. I am exhausted. I will attend the company gala this Saturday. I will bring the original deed to the Elm Street property, and I will publicly sign it over to you to make peace and save the family legacy. Just call off the lawyers and please stop ruining my business. I hovered my finger over the mouse pad. I knew my father's psychology perfectly. He did not just want the physical land. He wanted a massive public spectacle of my submission. He wanted to parade his conquered, rebellious daughter in front of his wealthy investors to prove his absolute, unquestionable dominance over the family hierarchy. He would never pass up the opportunity to humiliate me on a grand stage. I hit send. My heart pounded against my ribs as the minutes ticked by. The silence in my apartment felt heavy with anticipation. If he suspected a trap, he might try to force the transaction privately in a sterile boardroom before the event. But I banked everything on his massive, blinding arrogance. My phone chimed less than 10 minutes later. The reply from Richard was brief, dripping with arrogant victory and supreme condescension. See you Saturday, Kira. I am glad you finally came to your senses. Dress appropriately and do not be late. We have a family legacy to secure. I locked my computer screen and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long, steady breath. He had taken the bait completely. He had swallowed it whole. My father and my golden boy brother truly thought they had won. They thought they had crushed the unhinged spinster who dared to challenge their authority. They were going to walk into that luxury ballroom on Saturday night, expecting a glorious coronation. Instead, they were walking blindly into a federal prison sentence, and I was going to be the one standing on the stage, proudly holding the door open for them. Saturday evening descended on the city with a crisp, bitter chill, but the atmosphere surrounding the Grand Hotel radiated an almost suffocating heat born of extreme, unchecked wealth. I pulled my modest sedan up to the towering brass doors of the main entrance. The valet, accustomed to handling imported European sports cars and armored limousines, looked momentarily confused as I handed over my keys. I stepped onto the plush crimson carpet that lined the sweeping marble staircase, pulling my shoulders back and locking my spine into perfect, rigid alignment. I wore a floor-length, deep emerald silk gown with a high-structured neckline. My hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate twist, not a single strand out of place. My makeup was applied with the exact same cold surgical precision I used when dismantling a fraudulent tax return. I looked perfectly composed. I looked exactly like the broken, compliant daughter my father demanded me to be. I walked past the flash of paparazzi cameras and the stern faces of private security contractors flanking the entrance. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom stood wide open, pouring golden light and the sound of a live string quartet out into the lobby. I stepped across the threshold and let my eyes sweep over the room. The sheer scale of the financial excess was genuinely nauseating. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of the Harrison Holdings corporate logo anchored the corners of the room. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Every single dollar paying for this lavish display was stolen. I looked at the crowd, identifying faces I recognized from the society pages and financial journals. There were local politicians who relied on my father's campaign contributions. There were prominent venture capitalists and real estate moguls. They were laughing, clinking their glasses, and celebrating their guaranteed historic returns, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the middle of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. They were drinking champagne paid for by their own stolen capital. I navigated through the dense crowd, keeping my gaze forward, ignoring the few curious stares from socialites who vaguely recognized me as the exiled Harrison daughter. I did not have to search long to find my mother and my brother. They were holding court near the front of the massive presentation stage, basking in the glow of their perceived absolute victory. Patricia was draped in a silver sequined designer gown, a diamond necklace glittering heavily against her throat. She stood in the center of a circle of wealthy wives sipping her champagne with a look of pure, arrogant triumph. I moved closer, blending into the shadow of a towering floral arrangement just a few feet away. My mother's shrill melodic voice carried easily over the ambient noise of the ballroom. Yes, it has been a very trying week, Patricia sighed to a captivated audience of socialites, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. But Richard and I simply had to put our foot down. Kira has always struggled with her mental stability, you know. We finally had to show her some tough love for her own good. She was making a complete mess of her little accounting business and isolating herself terribly. But I am thrilled to say she has finally seen reason. She is bringing the deed to her grandfather's property tonight to sign it back over to the family trust where it belongs. It is a relief truly to have her back under our guidance, where we can properly monitor her condition. The women murmured in sympathetic agreement, praising my mother for her incredible maternal strength and patience. I felt a cold knot of pure disgust tighten in my stomach, but I kept my breathing slow and steady. A few feet away from Patricia, Derek was leaning against a high cocktail table, acting every bit the triumphant technology chief executive officer. He wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo jacket and held a tumbler of expensive scotch. He was bragging loudly to a group of older investors about the impending launch of Apex Innovations. I listened as he promised them astronomical dividends, knowing full well his entire operation was nothing but a hollow shell designed to launder the cash my father was actively embezzling. Derek caught my eye across the room. His smug, arrogant smile widened. He raised his scotch glass directly at me in a mocking, silent toast celebrating my supposed total defeat. I simply stared back at him, offering a blank, compliant nod. Suddenly, a heavy, firm hand gripped my shoulder from behind. I turned to see my father, Richard, looming over me. He looked immaculate in a custom-tailored black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. He projected the ultimate image of a powerful, benevolent corporate titan, but his eyes were hard, calculating, and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. Kira, Richard said loudly, ensuring the people standing nearby could hear his warm, welcoming tone. I am so glad you made it, sweetheart. You look absolutely beautiful tonight. He pulled me into a tight, aggressive embrace. To the onlookers, it looked like a heartwarming family reunion. But as he pressed his face against my cheek, his grip on my arms tightened painfully, and he hissed directly into my ear. Do not embarrass me tonight, Kira. You will smile. You will walk up on that stage when I call your name, and you will sign that paper without a single moment of hesitation. If you try to pull any stunts, I will have the conservatorship papers filed with the judge before you even make it to the parking garage. Do you have the original deed in your purse? I pulled back from the embrace, maintaining a perfectly docile expression for the watching crowd. I patted the side of my sleek black clutch purse. I brought exactly what you asked for, Richard. I am ready to do the right thing and put an end to all of this. Richard's chest puffed out with a deep breath of profound relief and victory. The tension momentarily left his shoulders. He truly believed his ruthless psychological warfare had broken me completely. Good girl, he murmured, his voice dripping with condescension. Go stand near the front stairs of the stage. The presentation is about to begin. I walked toward the designated spot, positioning myself exactly where he demanded. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The massive crystal chandeliers overhead dimmed to a soft theatrical glow. A hush fell over the packed ballroom as upbeat cinematic music pumped through the state-of-the-art sound system. The giant digital presentation screen spanning the back of the stage flared to life, displaying the Harrison Holdings corporate logo in crisp, glowing gold lettering. Richard strode confidently up the stairs and took his position behind a sleek, transparent glass podium. The room erupted into thunderous, sustained applause. He smiled broadly, soaking in the adoration of the hundreds of people he was currently defrauding. He raised his hands in a practiced gesture of humble gratitude, waiting for the applause to quiet down. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us on this magnificent evening. Richard's voice boomed smoothly through the microphone, echoing across the cavernous room. We are here tonight to celebrate not just the enduring legacy of Harrison Holdings, but the incredible limitless future we are building together. As many of you know, tonight marks the official announcement of our new commercial real estate mega merger. It is a monumental deal that will redefine the skyline of this city and guarantee historic, unprecedented returns for every single investor standing in this room today. The crowd cheered again. Patricia clapped enthusiastically from the front row, practically glowing with pride. But before we dive into the financials, Richard continued, his voice shifting to a softer, more emotional and deeply manipulative register. I want to take a moment to celebrate something even more important than business. I want to celebrate family. The Harrison legacy has always been built on unity, loyalty, and shared vision. Sometimes the younger generation loses their way. They stumble, and they need a firm guiding hand to bring them back to the fold. My daughter Kira is here with us tonight. A brilliant, blinding spotlight swung across the dark room, locking directly onto me. I stood perfectly still in the emerald gown, looking up at the man who had tried to destroy my life. Kira and I have had our differences recently, Richard proclaimed, addressing the crowd with a sorrowful, forgiving smile. But tonight she has decided to honor her grandfather's memory, to put family first, and to do the right thing for the future of this company. Kira, please join me on stage. The crowd parted gracefully, offering polite, encouraging applause as I walked down the center aisle. Every single step felt heavy and momentous, but my mind was laser-focused, executing the plan with absolute precision. I climbed the short staircase to the stage. Richard reached out and pulled me to his side, wrapping his arm heavily around my waist to project a unified front to his wealthy peers. He turned toward the glass podium. Resting perfectly in the center was a thick leather-bound legal document detailing the total transfer of the Elm Street property. Next to it sat an expensive, heavy gold fountain pen. Richard smiled down at me, his eyes burning with absolute victory and total control. He picked up the heavy gold pen and held it out toward me. Sign it, Kira, he whispered so quietly that the microphone could not pick it up. Secure the legacy. I reached out my hand and took the gold pen from his fingers. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the prodigal daughter to finally surrender. I looked down at the deed, then looked out at the sea of expectant faces, knowing that in just a few seconds, the legacy of Harrison Holdings would be completely and permanently destroyed. Saturday evening descended on the city with a crisp, bitter chill, but the atmosphere surrounding the Grand Hotel radiated an almost suffocating heat, born of extreme, unchecked wealth. I pulled my modest sedan up to the towering brass doors of the main entrance. The valet, accustomed to handling imported European sports cars and armored limousines, looked momentarily confused as I handed over my keys. I stepped onto the plush crimson carpet that lined the sweeping marble staircase, pulling my shoulders back and locking my spine into perfect, rigid alignment. I wore a floor-length, deep emerald silk gown with a high-structured neckline. My hair was pulled back into a severe, immaculate twist, not a single strand out of place. My makeup was applied with the exact same cold surgical precision I used when dismantling a fraudulent tax return. I looked perfectly composed. I looked exactly like the broken, compliant daughter my father demanded me to be. I walked past the flash of paparazzi cameras and the stern faces of private security contractors flanking the entrance. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom stood wide open, pouring golden light, and the sound of a live string quartet out into the lobby. I stepped across the threshold and let my eyes sweep over the room. The sheer scale of the financial excess was genuinely nauseating. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of the Harrison Holdings corporate logo anchored the corners of the room. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and crystal flutes of vintage champagne. Every single dollar paying for this lavish display was stolen. I looked at the crowd, identifying faces I recognized from the society pages and financial journals. There were local politicians who relied on my father's campaign contributions. There were prominent venture capitalists and real estate moguls. They were laughing, clinking their glasses, and celebrating their guaranteed historic returns, completely oblivious to the fact that they were standing in the middle of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. They were drinking champagne paid for by their own stolen capital. I navigated through the dense crowd, keeping my gaze forward, ignoring the few curious stares from socialites who vaguely recognized me as the exiled Harrison daughter. I did not have to search long to find my mother and my brother. They were holding court near the front of the massive presentation stage, basking in the glow of their perceived absolute victory. Patricia was draped in a silver sequined designer gown, a diamond necklace glittering heavily against her throat. She stood in the center of a circle of wealthy wives sipping her champagne with a look of pure, arrogant triumph. I moved closer, blending into the shadow of a towering floral arrangement just a few feet away. My mother's shrill melodic voice carried easily over the ambient noise of the ballroom. "Yes, it has been a very trying week," Patricia sighed to a captivated audience of socialites placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "But Richard and I simply had to put our foot down. Kira has always struggled with her mental stability, you know. We finally had to show her some tough love for her own good. She was making a complete mess of her little accounting business and isolating herself terribly. But I am thrilled to say she has finally seen reason. She is bringing the deed to her grandfather's property tonight to sign it back over to the family trust where it belongs. It is a relief truly to have her back under our guidance, where we can properly monitor her condition." The women murmured in sympathetic agreement, praising my mother for her incredible maternal strength and patience. I felt a cold knot of pure disgust tighten in my stomach, but I kept my breathing slow and steady. A few feet away from Patricia, Derrick was leaning against a high cocktail table, acting every bit the triumphant technology chief executive officer. He wore a bespoke velvet tuxedo jacket and held a tumbler of expensive scotch. He was bragging loudly to a group of older investors about the impending launch of Apex Innovations. I listened as he promised them astronomical dividends, knowing full well his entire operation was nothing but a hollow shell designed to launder the cash my father was actively embezzling. Derek caught my eye across the room. His smug, arrogant smile widened. He raised his scotch glass directly at me in a mocking, silent toast, celebrating my supposed total defeat. I simply stared back at him, offering a blank, compliant nod. Suddenly, a heavy, firm hand gripped my shoulder from behind. I turned to see my father, Richard, looming over me. He looked immaculate in a custom-tailored black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled. He projected the ultimate image of a powerful, benevolent corporate titan, but his eyes were hard, calculating, and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "Kira," Richard said loudly, ensuring the people standing nearby could hear his warm, welcoming tone. "I am so glad you made it, sweetheart. You look absolutely beautiful tonight." He pulled me into a tight, aggressive embrace. To the onlookers, it looked like a heartwarming family reunion, but as he pressed his face against my cheek, his grip on my arms tightened painfully, and he hissed directly into my ear. "Do not embarrass me tonight, Kira. You will smile, you will walk up on that stage when I call your name, and you will sign that paper without a single moment of hesitation. If you try to pull any stunts, I will have the conservatorship papers filed with the judge before you even make it to the parking garage. Do you have the original deed in your purse? I pulled back from the embrace, maintaining a perfectly docile expression for the watching crowd. I patted the side of my sleek black clutch purse. I brought exactly what you asked for, Richard. I am ready to do the right thing and put an end to all of this. Richard's chest puffed out with a deep breath of profound relief and victory. The tension momentarily left his shoulders. He truly believed his ruthless psychological warfare had broken me completely. Good girl, he murmured, his voice dripping with condescension. Go stand near the front stairs of the stage. The presentation is about to begin. I walked toward the designated spot, positioning myself exactly where he demanded. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing. The massive crystal chandeliers overhead dimmed to a soft, theatrical glow. A hush fell over the packed ballroom as upbeat cinematic music pumped through the state-of-the-art sound system. The giant digital presentation screen spanning the back of the stage flared to life, displaying the Harrison Holdings corporate logo in crisp, glowing gold lettering. Richard strode confidently up the stairs and took his position behind a sleek, transparent glass podium. The room erupted into thunderous, sustained applause. He smiled broadly, soaking in the adoration of the hundreds of people he was currently defrauding. He raised his hands in a practiced gesture of humble gratitude, waiting for the applause to quiet down. Thank you! Thank you all for joining us on this magnificent evening! Richard's voice boomed smoothly through the microphone, echoing across the cavernous room. We are here tonight to celebrate not just the enduring legacy of Harrison Holdings, but the incredible, limitless future we are building together. As many of you know, tonight marks the official announcement of our new commercial real estate mega-merger. It is a monumental deal that will redefine the skyline of this city and guarantee historic, unprecedented returns for every single investor standing in this room today. The crowd cheered again. Patricia clapped enthusiastically from the front row, practically glowing with pride. But before we dive into the financials, Richard continued, his voice shifting to a softer, more emotional, and deeply manipulative register. I want to take a moment to celebrate something even more important than business. I want to celebrate family. The Harrison legacy has always been built on unity, loyalty, and shared vision. Sometimes the younger generation loses their way. They stumble and they need a firm, guiding hand to bring them back to the fold. My daughter Kira is here with us tonight. A brilliant, blinding spotlight swung across the dark room, locking directly onto me. I stood perfectly still in the emerald gown, looking up at the man who had tried to destroy my life. Kira and I have had our differences recently, Richard proclaimed, addressing the crowd with a sorrowful, forgiving smile. But tonight she has decided to honor her grandfather's memory, to put family first, and to do the right thing for the future of this company. Kira, please join me on stage. The crowd parted gracefully, offering polite, encouraging applause as I walked down the center aisle. Every single step felt heavy and momentous, but my mind was laser-focused, executing the plan with absolute precision. I climbed the short staircase to the stage. Richard reached out and pulled me to his side, wrapping his arm heavily around my waist to project a unified front to his wealthy peers. He turned toward the glass podium. Resting perfectly in the center was a thick leather-bound legal document detailing the total transfer of the Elm Street property. Next to it sat an expensive, heavy gold fountain pen. Richard smiled down at me, his eyes burning with absolute victory and total control. He picked up the heavy gold pen and held it out toward me. Sign it, Kira, he whispered so quietly that the microphone could not pick it up. Secure the legacy. I reached out my hand and took the gold pen from his fingers. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the prodigal daughter to finally surrender. I looked down at the deed, then looked out at the sea of expectant faces, knowing that in just a few seconds, the legacy of Harrison Holdings would be completely and permanently destroyed. I held the heavy gold fountain pen suspended over the thick parchment of the deed. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, a collective holding of breath by hundreds of the city's most powerful elites. Richard stood inches away, his chest puffed out with arrogant triumph, waiting for my final act of submission. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not blink. I simply opened my fingers. The gold pen dropped. It hit the transparent glass podium with a sharp, echoing crack that resonated through the microphone and sliced through the quiet room. Richard flinched, his perfect smile faltering. "Kira, what are you doing? Pick up the pen and sign the document." I reached out and unclipped the microphone from its heavy metal stand, holding it firmly in my right hand. I reached into my clutch purse with my left hand and pulled out the small black remote control I had configured earlier that afternoon. "I am not signing anything, Richard," I said. My voice was ice cold, perfectly amplified, carrying across the massive ballroom with absolute clarity. "And there is no mega merger happening tonight." A collective gasp rippled through the wealthy audience. I pressed the main button on my remote. Behind us, the giant digital presentation screen flickered violently. The glowing gold Harrison Holdings corporate logo vanished into total darkness. In its place, a massive high-definition image of a vintage 1934 $20 bill illuminated the stage. The green ink was incredibly vivid, but the 11-character serial number in the corner was highlighted in a brilliant glowing red font. "My grandfather, Arthur Harrison, left me this exact $20 bill in his will," I announced, stepping away from the podium and pacing across the stage so every investor could see me clearly. My father mocked this inheritance. He told me it was lunch money. But Grandpa Harrison was a brilliant man. He told me to follow the numbers because numbers never lie. This serial number was not a joke. It was a cryptographic key to a hidden floor safe inside the Elm Street property, and inside that safe I found his personal handwritten shadow ledger. Richard lunged toward me, his face twisted in sudden panicked rage. "Turn that screen off right now. Cut the microphone. Security!" I sidestepped him easily. The private security contractors at the edge of the room did not move a single muscle. They were not paid enough to intervene in a live corporate meltdown. I pressed the remote a second time. The image of the $20 bill shrank to the corner of the screen. The rest of the massive display was instantly populated by dense, complex financial spreadsheets. Offshore routing numbers, dummy corporation registrations, and massive wire transfer logs scrolled continuously down the screen in stark white text against a pitch-black background. "Look closely at the screen, ladies and gentlemen," I commanded, projecting my voice over the rising murmur of the confused crowd. "What you are looking at is the complete and total financial anatomy of Harrison Holdings for the past 10 years. Richard has not been running a legitimate investment firm. He has been running a massive, catastrophic Ponzi scheme." The ballroom erupted into angry shouts. People stood up from their banquet tables, pointing at the data scrolling rapidly behind me. Patricia shrieked from the front row, covering her mouth with trembling, manicured hands. "You are lying!" Richard bellowed into the unamplified air, desperately trying to grab the microphone from my hand. "She is having a psychiatric break. Do not listen to a word she says." I pressed the remote again. The screen zoomed in on a specific series of wire transfers routed to the Cayman Islands. "Let us trace your money." I continued, relentlessly ignoring my father's frantic attempts to silence me. "When you wrote your investment checks to Harrison Holdings, that capital did not go into commercial real estate development. Richard routed your principal investments directly into an offshore shell company called Horizon Consulting. From there, he used your fresh capital to pay fake fabricated dividends to the early investors sitting in this very room, artificially inflating the company's value to keep you all entirely blind to the theft." I pointed directly at a prominent venture capitalist sitting in the second row. "Mr. Sterling, that impressive dividend check you received last quarter, it was not real estate profit. It was the entry capital paid by the man sitting 2 tables behind you." The venture capitalist's face drained of all color. Pandemonium was actively breaking out across the ballroom floor. Wealthy investors were screaming, throwing their champagne glasses onto the carpet and surging aggressively toward the stage. "But Richard did not just use your money to pay fake dividends," I said, raising my voice to cut through the mounting chaos. "He used it to fund his personal lifestyle. The luxury mansion, the country club galas, the imported cars. And most importantly, He used your stolen life savings to fund my brother's technology startup. I clicked the remote for the fourth time. The screen split perfectly in half. On the left side, the offshore routing numbers traced directly into the domestic operating accounts of Apex Innovations. On the right side, the high-definition night vision security footage began to play. The silent video showed Derek dressed in a dark hoodie and heavy work gloves violently smashing the antique bookshelves in my grandfather's study with a heavy steel crowbar. Derek Harrison is not a brilliant tech entrepreneur, I announced, watching my brother freeze in absolute terror near the front of the stage. Apex Innovations has no software. It has no actual clients. It is a completely empty shell company designed specifically to launder your stolen money back into the United States. Derek is actively receiving embezzled funds. And when I refused to sign over the Elm Street property so my father could secure a fraudulent bailout loan, Derek broke into my house in the middle of the night to aggressively destroy evidence. Derek stumbled backward, knocking over a high cocktail table. Glasses shattered against the marble floor. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an exit, but the crowd of furious investors had already formed an impenetrable wall of angry bodies. In total, I declared, driving the final lethal nail into the coffin of the Harrison family legacy. Richard Harrison has embezzled exactly $40 million of your private capital. The company is completely bankrupt. The money is entirely gone. Richard stood frozen by the glass podium. His immaculate tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap costume. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving as he stared out at the hundreds of powerful people who now realized he had robbed them blind. His arrogant, untouchable facade had disintegrated. He was nothing but a cornered, terrified criminal. "Kira, please," Richard begged. His voice dropped to a pathetic, trembling whisper. "Turn it off. I am your father." "You stopped being my father the day you chose extreme greed over basic integrity," I replied coldly, lowering the microphone to my side. Before Richard could say another word, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the grand ballroom slammed open with explosive, deafening force. The chaotic shouting of the investors was instantly silenced by the commanding, authoritative presence entering the room. A line of men and women wearing dark tactical suits and federal windbreakers marched into the ballroom. Their silver badges caught the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. They moved with absolute synchronized precision, parting the sea of stunned socialites and furious executives. At the front of the formation walked David Miller, his face set in a hard, uncompromising glare. "Federal agents." David's voice boomed across the vast room, carrying the full, terrifying weight of the government. Nobody move. The agents swarmed the front of the room in seconds. Two agents broke off and headed straight for Derek. My brother tried to scramble backward over a row of overturned chairs, crying out for our mother to help him. The agents tackled him easily, pressing him face down into the expensive carpet and snapping cold steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. Patricia screamed. It was a visceral, horrifying sound of total loss. She lunged forward, trying to pull the federal agents off her golden boy, but another agent stepped into her path, holding a firm hand up to block her. She collapsed onto the floor, the silver sequins of her designer gown pooling around her as she wailed hysterically. She was not crying for Derek. She was crying for the sudden violent death of her wealth, her social status, and her perfect suburban illusion. David Miller climbed the stairs to the main stage. He walked directly past me, not breaking his professional demeanor, and stepped right up to the glass podium where Richard stood paralyzed. "Richard Harrison," David stated, pulling a thick stack of folded warrants from his inner jacket pocket. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of massive securities fraud, federal embezzlement, and extensive money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." An agent stepped up behind my father, grabbing his arms and pulling them sharply behind his back. The distinct metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the stage was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Richard did not fight back. He did not yell or threaten them with his corporate lawyers. He just stared blankly at the floor, a broken, ruined man. As the federal agents marched my father and my brother down the center aisle, leading them out of the luxury ballroom in handcuffs, the crowd of defrauded investors began shouting again, demanding answers, demanding their stolen millions. But the targets of their fury were already being escorted into the back of federal transport vehicles waiting outside in the freezing rain. I stood alone on the massive stage. The digital screen behind me still displayed the exact financial evidence of their crimes. I looked down at the gold fountain pen resting harmlessly near my feet. I had not signed away my grandfather's property. I had not surrendered my independence. I had followed the numbers, and the numbers had brought the entire corrupt empire crashing down to the ground. I took a deep, steady breath of the chaotic air, set the microphone gently onto the glass podium, and walked calmly off the stage, stepping freely into the rest of my life. The weeks following the raid at the Grand Hotel moved with a dizzying, relentless speed. The federal prosecutors did not even need to build a complex case. They simply followed the exact, meticulous map I had drawn for them. The national media descended on the city like a swarm of locusts, devouring every sensational detail of the Harrison family collapse. The trial itself was incredibly short and entirely devastating. Richard's expensive corporate defense attorneys took one look at the impeccably organized digital and physical evidence I provided to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they immediately advised him to accept a plea deal. But Richard, blinded by his own massive ego and absolute narcissism, until the bitter end refused to concede. He dragged the proceedings into open federal court, forcing the prosecution to display his crimes on public record for the entire world to see. It was a spectacular, humiliating disaster. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. There would be no early parole, no luxury minimum security facility for the disgraced corporate titan. He was stripped of his tailored suits and locked away in a standard federal penitentiary, destined to spend the rest of his natural life behind bars, completely stripped of the wealth and power he worshipped above his own children. Derek collapsed almost instantly under the intense pressure of the federal investigation. My golden boy brother, who had mocked my tiny apartment and threatened to destroy my career, cried uncontrollably during his initial interrogation. Desperate to save himself from a lifetime of incarceration, he eagerly turned state's evidence against our father. He detailed exactly how Apex Innovations operated as a massive money laundering front, trying to shift the entirety of the blame onto Richard. His cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, but the judge showed no leniency for his willing participation. Derek was handed 10 years in a federal facility. The government immediately froze his trust fund, seized his luxury vintage car collection, and liquidated every single asset tied to his name. He was left entirely bankrupt, his reputation completely obliterated, facing a decade in a cold concrete cell with absolutely nothing to show for his arrogant, stolen life. Patricia suffered a different kind of imprisonment. The federal government seized the sprawling suburban mansion, the luxury vehicles, and the offshore accounts to begin paying restitution to the defrauded investors. My mother was given exactly 48 hours to pack whatever personal belongings she could fit into 3 standard suitcases. She was forcibly evicted from the only lifestyle she considered worth living. The wealthy socialites and country club wives she had desperately tried to impress completely abandoned her. She was entirely ostracized, treated like a toxic pariah in the city she used to rule. Left with absolutely no legitimate income and zero marketable skills, she was forced to move into a tiny, run-down rental apartment on the extreme industrial outskirts of the city. It was incredibly poetic justice. She was now living in the exact type of neighborhood she had ruthlessly mocked me for inheriting. She tried calling my office several times, leaving desperate voicemails begging for financial support and demanding that I fulfill my duties as a loyal daughter. I listened to exactly 5 seconds of her first voicemail before I permanently blocked her number and instructed my receptionist to route any further contact directly to the agency's legal counsel. I owed her absolutely nothing, and I felt not a single ounce of guilt cutting the cord forever. With the toxic weight of my biological family permanently removed from my life, I finally stepped fully into my own independence. I did not touch a single cent of the recovered Harrison Holdings money. I did not need it. My forensic accounting agency was experiencing an unprecedented explosion of growth. The highly publicized takedown of my father's massive corporate Ponzi scheme had inadvertently served as the greatest marketing campaign in the history of the financial sector. Every major corporation, regional bank, and private investment group in the state realized that my professional integrity was absolutely uncompromisable. They knew I could not be bought, bullied, or intimidated, not even by my own blood. My client roster tripled in less than a month. I was forced to hire 12 new senior analysts just to handle the massive influx of highly lucrative contracts. I took the legitimate hard-earned profits from my booming agency and secured a specialized historical restoration loan from a local commercial bank. I directed every ounce of that capital toward Grandpa Harrison's property on Elm Street. It took 9 months of grueling, meticulous construction work, but the results were nothing short of breathtaking. The rotting, boarded-up Victorian junk house that my father had laughed at was completely transformed. I hired a team of expert architects to carefully strip away the decades of decay while preserving the stunning historical skeleton of the building. We restored the original hand-carved oak banisters and the intricate crown molding, polishing the dark wood until it gleamed beautifully in the light. We ripped out the rotting plywood and installed massive energy-efficient floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the interior with natural sunlight. The exterior was reinforced with sleek steel beams and modern glass panels, creating a perfect architectural harmony between the classic Victorian foundation and cutting-edge modern design. It was no longer a blighted eyesore dragging down the industrial district. It was a towering, beautiful monument to resilience and absolute truth. I moved my entire forensic accounting agency into the renovated property, officially making it our new corporate headquarters. The massive first floor, once choked with dust and debris, now featured an open-concept workspace filled with state-of-the-art server stations and soundproof, glass-walled conference rooms. The energy in the building was vibrant, professional, and entirely clean. My employees loved the space, completely unaware of the dark secrets the floorboards had once concealed. I claimed my grandfather's old study at the back of the house as my private executive office. I kept the heavy mahogany double doors, restoring their original brass handles so they opened with a satisfying, substantial weight. The heavy Persian rug was permanently gone, exposing the beautifully refinished hardwood floors. But I kept the custom-built floor safe, exactly where it was securely hidden beneath my heavy, modern glass desk. I did not need it to hide a shadow ledger anymore, but it remained as a quiet, grounded reminder of the incredible history this room had once held and the brilliant mind that had designed it. One crisp Tuesday morning, exactly a year after the federal raid, I arrived at the office early. The morning sun streamed through the large, pristine windows, casting bright geometric patterns across the polished hardwood floor. My receptionist brought me a fresh cup of black coffee, informing me that the chief executive officer of a massive international logistics firm was waiting in the main conference room for our 9 o'clock consultation. My business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I had built an empire of my own, brick by brick, and every single foundation was rooted in absolute, undeniable honesty. I walked behind my glass desk and sat down in my ergonomic leather chair. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the quiet peace of the morning settle into my chest. I looked up at the wall directly across from my desk. The space was painted a crisp, calming white, completely bare, except for one single item hanging perfectly in the center. Illuminated by a small, dedicated gallery light was a simple, elegant, matte black frame. Pressed securely between the two panes of UV protective glass rested the crisp, vintage 1934 $20 bill. The green ink remained incredibly vivid, and the specific 11-character serial number in the corner stood out like a beacon of justice. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. My family had sat around that cold mahogany table in the law office and laughed at that piece of paper. They thought it was the ultimate humiliating insult. They genuinely believed it was a final cruel joke meant to break the spirit of the family scapegoat. They thought they had won the world, leaving me with nothing but a rotting house and lunch money. But Grandpa Harrison had known exactly what he was doing. He knew my parents were blinded by superficial greed. He knew they lacked the patience, the intelligence, and the basic respect required to look beneath the surface. He did not just leave me a clever clue to uncover a massive federal crime. He left me the undeniable proof that my analytical mind, the very trait my family constantly mocked and belittled, was my absolute greatest strength. He had handed me the exact keys to my own freedom hidden in plain sight, one 11-character serial number at a time. And as I turned my attention to the glowing screen of my computer monitor, ready to dive into a new stack of complex financial audits, I knew with absolute unshakable certainty that no one would ever dare to underestimate me again. If there is one thing I have learned from watching my family's empire collapse, it is that being the outcast is not a curse. It is a profound advantage. For my entire life, my parents and my brother treated my analytical mind as a flaw. They viewed my quiet observation as weakness, and my refusal to play their superficial games as a lack of ambition. But they were completely wrong. When you are the family scapegoat, people constantly underestimate you. They become arrogant and careless. They show you exactly who they are because they do not believe you have the power to hold them accountable. My grandfather knew this. He knew that the very traits my family mocked were the exact tools I needed to find the truth and set myself free. The greatest lesson I can share is that your worth is never defined by the people who refuse to see it. You do not need to change yourself to fit into a toxic dynamic, and you certainly do not need to wait for their validation to build a meaningful life. True power comes from trusting your own instincts. It comes from maintaining your integrity when everyone around you is trading theirs for cheap temporary success. Freedom is not about getting revenge. It is about building a foundation so strong and so deeply rooted in absolute truth that no one can ever tear it down. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to support you? How did you turn their doubt into your greatest strength? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories about reclaiming your power, finding your voice, and walking away from toxic environments. Remember, your unique mind is your greatest weapon. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.